For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Hey everybody, today we are debating whether or not Old Testament figures lived to be as old as 900 years old, and we are starting right now. Hey everybody, thrilled to have you here for this especially interesting debate, one that we've never had before, that's for sure. Today we are debating whether or not Old Testament prophets or figures lived to be as old as 900 years old. So, having a little bit of Streamlabs delay, but don't worry, we're going to get through this. Want to introduce our speakers who are linked in the description. So if you're like, Raw Matt, I like that. Well, you can find his link as he is, you could say, a colleague of Standing for Truths. They are working at the same channel. And Nick Lamar, we are thrilled to have you here. He has his link in the description for his Twitter. And I'm actually going to put your blog or webpage in there as well. It just crossed my mind. So, one thing I want to mention really quick, as we are very excited for this provocative and interesting debate that's coming up, is the provocateur, Kent Hovind, will be back. That's on July 19th. It's a Friday. He is going to be debating whether or not evolution is dangerous with Mr. Archaeopteryx. So we are very excited for that provocative debate, and we are also thrilled for introducing our co-moderator as well, who he, like I said, shares the same link as Raw Matt. That's in the description as well. Standing for Truth is co-modding today. Don't worry, as I know, last time he was on, maybe he had a little bit too much coffee. It got pretty crazy. By the way, I got some feedback. Some people said, hey, the moderation, Standing for Truth he was like cats and dogs out there. We needed more moderation. I want to take responsibility for that. I'm sincerely sorry. I kind of threw Raw Matt. He was moderating. I threw him into this where when we have short time sections, it's really challenging to keep an eye on the live chat, plus the conversation, plus the timer. Raw Matt has got integrity. It was just that it's like so many things to do at once is a challenge. And so we appreciate Raw Matt moderating. And Standing for Truth, you got to lay off the coffee, man. That was insane. Standing for Truth, we love having you here. We appreciate
especially that late at night. You can bet yourself going to be very neutral, unbiased today in my moderation. No whales and pine trees jokes, I promise.
Very nice. We appreciate that. And want to let you know, whether you are a creationist or atheist, Christian, Muslim, no matter where you stand, flat earthers, we are glad to have you here. We want you to feel welcome. We hope that we can build an eclectic community of different people with different beliefs or views. And so if this is your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button, as we are excited about future debates coming up that you can see down there in the little marquee. I almost want to grab them out of there and pull them up. Very excited for those. But I'm going to hand it over to our good friend who, we were joking right before the stream started, we were talking about the nicknames. I'm sorry, Standing for Truth, I'm throwing you under the bus a little bit, but the nicknames such as Standing for Lies or Standing for Trash, these are brutal, yeah, but he always takes it well.
Well, like I told Nick before,
Yes, that's right. We'll keep it mellow. So, thank you both of the speakers for being here. Thank you, Standing for Truth, for helping moderating. And I'm going to hand it over to Standing for Truth, who will introduce the format for tonight's debate. And I will be in the live chat taking your questions. If you have any questions, feel free to fire them into the live chat. I will pull them out, put them in a list, and we will read them at the end for the speakers. So, thank you very much for that. And Standing for Truth, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, James. Well, right now I'm definitely sitting for truth, so I feel relaxed, feel comfortable, really looking forward to this. Raw Matt, Nicholas. So the format for the debate will be 10-minute openings, followed by 5-minute rebuttals, and then a 30-minute discussion period, my favorite part, really looking forward to this, ending with a 5-minute closing statement, and then 20 minutes of question and answer. So, can you hear me now, James?
Yes.
He's being silent for truth.
Silent for truth.
Sitting for truth and silent for truth. How much did you, I went over the entire format. Could you hear me on that one?
Lost you at question and answer.
Okay. So as long as you can hear me now, I guess that's good. Have we decided who's going first?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got Raw Matt. Raw Matt, I'm going to start the timer. You got 10 minutes for your opening. I'm going to start it on your first word. Go ahead, man.
All right, here we go. God created man to live forever. It was Adam's sin that brought death into the world. God told Adam, because of you, the earth is cursed. From that time forward, lifespan has been decreasing. Were the ages allegorical? No. Could the ages have been lunar months? No, because the patriarchs would have been having children like Kenan, which would have placed them at less than 6 years old, Seth at 8 years old, Enoch at 5. So obviously the lunar months are not realistic. The extreme ages of the years and the people in the Bible, like the 10 patriarchs, aren't just about them. They're actually mentioned throughout the Bible, where it shows that man life diminishes to his lowly place of 100. Even the epic Persian called the Book of Kings lists the similar ages, up to 1,000 years. You find these in Greece, China, India, Vietnam, South America, and Japan. Significant research was done on the matter of these chronological genealogies, which concluded that they line up to the calendars of many traditions and cultures worldwide. So we're pretty confident that the actual years in the calendars of the ancient Hebrew sects reflect this, including others. Jewish people believe that they were literal. It's in their language, it's their scriptures, they wrote it, so we presume that they understood their own language. So with different environmental conditions, such as the more pressure, which has been shown to increase lifespan, fruit flies in the hyperbaric biospheres in Texas live 10 times longer than normal just by increasing air pressure. With more magnetism in the past, we have been shown that increasing lifespan with just magnetism did something to the piranhas. They lived up to they grew up to 4 times larger and grew twice as long. The stronger ozone layer in the past that protects us from ultraviolet radiation, which would increase lifespan and health as well, while at the same time discovering that early Earth was actually like a Garden of Eden. We also have evidence from hyperbaric chambers, which are wonderful tools for testing. So far, we have made huge dragonflies and many other creatures, but they were testing mostly for size. But what they found out is that life expectancy went up in every single case. Since they were either replicating one or more of the aspects of ancient Earth, then we know by empirical evidence that life extension just from living back then was possible. And yes, Denisovans and Neanderthal were totally humans. Studies have shown that 95% of their DNA is identical to present-day humans. And Neanderthal DNA appears to fall within inside the variation of present-day humans. I know they portrayed Neanderthal as a hunched-over hairy ape man, but this is not the case, as Neanderthal actually had less body hair than present-day humans. For example, this is due to a genetic marker called RS4849721. They are both shared by us and them. No surprise there. Here's an instrument they made, so they were making instruments and playing music, which no primate does. We know that ancient man was physically superior as well. They had larger brains, and we know today that larger brains correlate to longer lifespan. The larger, and we go back in time, the larger, as you can see, the physically superior they get. Scientists wanted to compare the Neanderthal genome to see how different they actually were. So they picked a random Neanderthal from the GenBank NC01137. The findings were shocking, with that Neanderthal had far less mutations than people today. This is what would be expected with creationism, with our model, if ancient man was superior than modern day man. Neanderthal children had no brow ridges. These brow ridges grew very slowly over time throughout their life. Even Neanderthal teens still had no brow ridges. So we know observationally they were extremely aged people, just like our model says. Neanderthal teeth have also been investigated, and there are more good evidence because they have high fractal enamel repair systems, including enamel regeneration inside their teeth, called pellicle, allowing their teeth to heal, unlike humans today. Here's the jaw of a 13-year-old kid from the 1960s. Research concluded that the jaw turned out to be the equivalent of today's child of 9 years old, meaning that a child in the late 1600s did in 13 years what it only takes 9 years today to accomplish for a child. This is more proof that we were slower developing in the past. Now, with no one alive right now at the age of 500, how can I make the argument that in the past, that they did? Well, this is easy. I can answer this with a question. Can man today live to 900? Well, the answer is yes. Here's a gerontologist by the name of Dr. Aubrey de Grey. He's a pioneer in anti-aging, a biologist and biomedical gerontologist who works for the Sense Foundation, trying to discover a cure for aging once and for all. This isn't science fiction. It's on the horizon for all of us. This is what transhumanism movement is all about. It's about using science and technology like gene editing software, CRISPR-Cas9, to tap into our genetic activation dormant longevity genes so we can switch them on and live forever. So if man today has the potential to live for 1,000 years, why couldn't physically and genetically superior ancient man living in these far better environmental conditions with better foods, fewer diseases, live for that amount of time? Logically, I believe that I'm making the case that we could. But heavy bombardment can come from tobacco smoke, harmful food additives, radon gas, chemicals, and a lot of ultraviolet radiation. The MTHFR gene mutation function is actually broken anywhere from 20 to 70% in all people on Earth today. This matters because it's a master gene regulator. It controls how well other genes work. So the worse it gets, the worse others get. For example, here's the Dickinson children, dubbed the Methuselah children. They were kept prisoner by their mother in an attic for their entire childhood, never allowed outside to play even once. So they never were exposed to the damage of the sun's radiation, which causes what? You guessed it, more harmful mutations and faster aging. Here are the kids at 15, 13, and 18 years old, in that order. As you can see, their age is very, very slow. Another good example is the Jeannie Wiley. At 13 years old, she was basically strapped, her entire life, she was actually chained to a toilet because of her incontinence, and her dad thought she was retarded, so he didn't want anything to do with her, so he locked her in a room. Here she is at 19 years old. She was never exposed to the sun's radiation. She also stopped aging. Here's a retired truck driver, the left side of his face exposed to the sun as he drove his entire career. Here are identical twin sisters. One worked outside, the other worked inside. Here are two twins. One is a smoker, high mutational load, the other is not. Stacked with this and the fact that humans add 64 mutations every single generation, we have a problem. We also have aging diseases today. Here's Werner syndrome and here's progeria. These diseases are proven that they link genes to aging. Next, we have our biblical creation model, which lines up with the evidence of early Earth was being more conducive to living longer and preventing ultraviolet damage today. This stacked with the genetic factors that allow man to live much larger. Our original diet and how man ate compared to now is also very different. Today, people eat almost anything and cook nearly all of their foods. The Pottinger cat study proved without question that the harm that this does to a population over time. We humans are no different. We were created to eat a certain way, and no one does this anymore. With a generation after generation of doing everything wrong, we see what we see in the world today. This is evidence, is topped with the fact that we know heirloom, wild, fresh foods are healthier and superior for health than today's high sugar content hybrids, grown for our current sugar craving population that are picked early and sit on grocery store shelves for who knows how long. Most people don't even eat vegetables or fruit. So also, considering that nearly everybody has their longevity genes turned off in people permanently today from mutations or wrong SNP attachment to the gene, we have identified over 16 specific genes correlated with aging. So the best question should be, if man can now live to be 1,000 by turning back on these dormant genes, why couldn't man in the past who had these genes probably already functioning have less total mutation buildup, not live so long? It seems logical based on the evidence that these mutations build up and that the genome is crumbling. So with more pure genetics, this longevity would have been normal. So we believe that and we also know that magnetism makes things live longer, pressure makes things live longer. We know that diet makes things live longer. We know that fewer mutations mean less disease. We know
got 2 minutes, Matt. 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. We know that stronger genetics makes things live longer. Then why is it impossible to think then that all of those things put together, man couldn't live much longer? I think it's crazy to assume that they didn't. So I would love to know why a gerontologist, geneticist, and specialist in the field of aging, who all say that inside of us is the capacity to live like the people lived in the Bible, yet my opponent here will say that this is wrong. So if the biological evidence is inside of us and the scientific evidence shows that man has the ability to live to extreme ages currently, so if we have this potential inside of us right now, locked away, then it's pretty strong evidence that ancient man was far superior in the past, either way. Mankind could have reached these extreme numbers like the ancient texts talked about. Now, we do find evidence for these extreme ages when we test their bones. For example, Neanderthals that were found in Spain had far better and longer lives than those that were found in the north that lived in extreme cold regions of the world. They became inbred and cannibal, but all of the bones found in Spain were saturated in strontium, meaning they were plant eaters. They had large and thick skulls, and their dental examinations by Dr. Jack Quazzo proved that they were extremely aged human beings. And this can be denied or rationalized away, but the fact is, I don't believe that that's the case. I think that humans lived for a very, very long time, and we do have evidence to back this up. Or you can just continue to believe those who are not experts in aging, but have guessed or estimated ages based on their own personal interpretation of the evidence, based on their own uniformitarian belief that they were indoctrinated to believe. And they use biased assumptions when calibrating all molecular clocks.
15 seconds.
The theory of evolution is the only theory that is protected by law. It is not open to criticism and has removed all variants to be falsified and removed as a theory. Good enough. Let me stop screen sharing.
Awesome. Just on time. So thanks, Matt, for your opening presentation there. Nick, whenever you're ready, I've got you set for 10 minutes. I can start on your first word or whenever you're good to go.
All right, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for having me. I think this is a very interesting topic. I'm going to speak a little bit about it in a broader sense at first, and then try to zoom in on a couple of interesting things. First of all, if evolution or any other theory is protected by law, this is the first I've heard of it. I do believe there are some protections against, there's protections against teaching evolution versus creationism under certain circumstances. That's all I know of, and it's certainly not protected from any kind of criticism. Now, science is, without a doubt, humankind's single most successful endeavor. In the last 350 years, science has accomplished more than we were able to accomplish in the 10,000 years before that. In every instance where the Bible and science have collided and they have disagreed, there has not been a single instance where the biblical interpretation or version of events is the one that we currently use. It has not survived contact with it. Now, it is true that a lot of elements of science can be somewhat frustrating. And I am in discussions with people constantly saying, well, it's unfair that science has this requirement or that requirement, but that is one of the reasons it's been so successful. And I think its success is irrefutable. We've gotten a man on the moon. We discovered electricity. We have antibiotics. We have a whole bunch of marvelous, wonderful things. And I think that demonstrates its success. On the other side, and science at present, the best that we know, the maximum human life expectancy is 125 years. The oldest human being that we can confirm to have lived is only 122 years old. Was only 122 years old. Science tells us that Neanderthal life expectancy, well, the average life was 35. If you could pass certain if you could pass certain milestones, you had a chance of living longer, but it wasn't necessarily easy to make it to at least at a minimum 35. We also know that, science shows no evidence whatsoever of these extended life expectancies in the Bible. What I find interesting is, and here is one of the downsides of science, you can get a whole bunch of people who claim all sorts of hypotheses. And one of the things that I saw scrolling up there was hypothesis, hypothesis, hypothesis. Science does not deal in hypotheses. It does in terms of when you're trying to study or when you're trying to come to a conclusion. But in terms of what is considered fact, it's not a hypothesis and it's not a guess. And there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever for extended life expectancy. There is reason to expect that they maybe live somewhat longer than us for possible reasons and less long for others. Did they have bacteria? Did they have things that could injure them? The oldest known bacteria goes back over 2.4 billion years. And the oldest there was a honeybee that had deadly toxic bacteria in its belly found in amber that is 25 million years old. Now, every one of the scientific studies into either aging or into any other unusual claims of the Bible have been unable to verify any of them, and in fact in some cases have concluded that they did not happen. The Israelis concluded that the Exodus did not happen after they looked for evidence of it for 5 years and couldn't find any. Now, I find it interesting that we appear to be quoting scientists who are outliers and who have hypotheses, who say that either we could have lived longer, which I accept is a possibility. I just don't see any evidence for it and a good deal of evidence against. And yet we seem to be discussing claims of science as if it's scientific, as if it falls under the rigor and the credibility of science, while ignoring so much else of the credibility of science. There are other texts that have indeed said that people have lived a very long time. However, in Sumeria, the Book of Kings did not actually say that people had lived 1,000 years. It said that the oldest living king was 30,000 years old, which was in fact 3 times longer than how long the Bible says the earth has been around. So if we're going to start talking about what other texts say, it seems to me that we're cherry picking when we say, well, there are other texts that support it. Yes, but they actually refute other fundamental claims of the Bible, just as science in general does. In terms of how old, there are other reasons to believe that one might exaggerate the age of these people. It is true that some people have suggested a lunar calendar, and that is why the numbers are so wildly inconsistent with what we understand. It is true that that would have a number of people siring children at the age of 5, so that is unlikely. It still is not necessarily out of the realm of possibility if you include also other errors or other possible exceptions to them necessarily doing it accurately. There are other things in the Bible which many already take as metaphor, and in fact a great deal of the Bible is considered to be metaphor, and depending on how it's translated has meant different things to different people. Very few people actually accept 7 days as 7 earth days. Very few people. There's been huge discussions over the metaphor of the parable of the 10 minas for the first 1,300 years of Christianity. That was seen to be the second coming of Jesus Christ, and it was a metaphor for how people should go around slaughtering in his name. Only in the last 300 years did we say, no, it's actually a critique of King Herod. So it seems to me that there is a great deal of wiggle room in how we look at the Bible and how people have looked at the Bible, and assuming that these numbers are accurate, especially when in order to do so you have to cherry pick A, how you look at science, B, which scientists you are listening to, and C, what other texts such as the Book of Kings, which again, and the total length of rule of all kings in the Book of Kings is 230,000 years, which is well in excess of what the Bible says we lived for. Now, how long did we live back then? Again, there is science into this, but the science has found, and this is interesting because he had brought up the bones of a Neanderthal and how they had showed that he was, how old he was. That is, in fact, or not the bones. The
3
teeth.
minutes, Nick. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The teeth are one of the best indicators we have of how old somebody lived. And the reason is, especially if we know their diet, and they did live on a Mediterranean diet, and there are some significant differences in this diet, which I would like to get into, some pluses, some minuses. But those differences that factored in, and the closest diet right now to that is either a Mediterranean diet or a Japanese diet, believe it or not. At any rate, still has a wear on the teeth, and that wear is reasonably consistent. And based on that wear, you can tell how old someone is. And we have yet to discover any Neanderthal that was in excess of 85, 86 years old, and the average was 35. And it seems to me that if you're going to claim an exceptional lifespan, you have to be able to find a way, not that you believe it, not that you can hypothesize it, not that a few scientists concur with you, because I have met scientists who think that the earth is flat, and I am not kidding about that. You have to be able to demonstrate it somehow using science, and science which, by the way, you do not on one hand accept and on the other hand deny when you say, oh yes, but the flood was real, even though science says it was not. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that opening, Nick. You still had 1 minute and 44 seconds left. We can throw that into the discussion period, and that makes the discussion period 31 minutes and 44 seconds. So the next phase of the debate is the rebuttal round. We're going to go right into Raw Matt. Raw Matt, you have 5 minutes. I'm just going to set the clock here and start on your first word. Go ahead, man.
Okay, well, I want to address as much as I possibly can for him. So he said that science and the Bible are not really correlated. Every time they discover something, it actually disproves the Bible. But we've shown that the Bible describes as everybody coming from a single male and a single female. We found that all human beings come from a single female called mtDNA Eve. All males come from a Y chromosome Adam. They have found no other ancestors. They can presume all that they want that they exist, but they've never actually found anything. The Bible talks about all man being created from the rib. Human beings, no primate, only human beings. You remove a rib, they can grow back. That's pretty profound. There's the odds that human language can't arise on its own. All empirical evidence shows that it can't, but Adam was taught language, it says. I don't know. So there's a lot of science that I believe is correlated, but I'll move on because I don't want to waste time with one thing. Neanderthal life being based on 35 years old is because they presumed that everything was so violent back then. Like, what would man have done with dinosaurs walking around them? Obviously, they didn't live too long because everything was just bigger and stronger and more damaging. Well, man has fire. Everything on Earth is scared of fire. I don't care how big the animal gets. If you have fire, you're pretty safe. And plus, man's small. If dinosaurs big, you live in a cave. I don't think man was dumb enough to live where dinosaurs live in the first place. I'm pretty sure they would have gotten away from things. But let's see, diet being different. Well, yeah, they did test the teeth. And as I was saying in the thing is they found that the Neanderthal actually have a repair mechanism, an enamel repair mechanism that's inside of them that actually showed that they rebuilt their teeth. So that was amazing because modern day people just don't have this. As far as the Sumerian king list, that's true. However, their mathematical system was very different. See, we use a base 10 system, which the Jewish Hebrew people do as well. And they used a base system of 60, the sexagesmal system. So when they were reading and counting the tens, they added 60 to it. That's why the ages look extremely long. And they're like, you see everything. So if you did the math and you looked at Methuselah, for example, and you multiply that times the 60, you get those extremely long ages because that's where the Sumerians did. They took what they knew and they translate. They have a different system when they moved and moved into a different civilization. Oh, by the way, there was no geologist or gerontologist, that are actually, that I know of, that study longevity and aging, that are creationists. All of these are people that believe that, they're transhumanists, actually. They believe that we will transcend through evolution our weak form that we're in, and we'll live indefinitely. That the cells inside of us, they're basically destined to never die. If their environment is clean, kind of like the HeLa cells. The HeLa cells have been found that if you remove the waste and you give them good nutrition, they cannot die. They live forever. But, if the environment, like the blood, if it's toxic and poison and messed up, then it's going to degrade and it's going to cause that cell to be messed up. And then when it clones itself and goes through mitosis and mitosis, then what's going to happen is it's going to carry that on to its next generation. And then we fall into senescence where the cells build up and they don't die and they cause cancer. So these people don't believe in the Bible at all, but they're saying that we could live for this thousands of years, what the Bible is actually telling us. So that's fascinating. Let's see. The Royal Society is the one where they actually kind of debate and determine whether or not evolution should be taught and how it should be. They are the ones that really kind of focus on how it should be taken. They think they should remove Darwin's theory now, and they should go with a more proven. So it's much safer.
You've got 1 minute, Matt. 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. Where am I? I think I got everything that he mentioned. Let's see. I could go down the list of things that said that were correlated. So, for example, the Bible says that man was created to eat from the fruit of the tree and animals from the plants of the ground. Well, we found now that humans are frugivores, not omnivores. We can't go outside and eat grass and eat leaves. We can't eat pigs raw. We'll die. We'll get horribly sick. We can't eat grains raw. We have to process these things. We have to cook them for that to occur. So we are formed to be frugivore. Matter of fact, since 2002, that is what I eat. I just eat fruits and nuts and seeds. if I soak and sprout those actually. But that's been my diet, so I apply that, and that's what I've been doing for a long time. Even carnivores and obligate carnivores, if placed on plants, they can eat exactly all those things today. Matter of fact, I could even screen share that. I would hate to waste time doing that, but I'll find it. What time? Okay, thanks. Never mind, I won't show people.
Okay, thank you so much for that rebuttal, Matt. Nick, we are on to you. You got 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right, a lot to unpack there. I'll do my best as quickly as possible. Aging is caused when the cells in your body decay. They decay and your face gets longer, you get gray hair. The hair goes gray because hair follicles tend to die faster. What causes the color, I should say, dies faster, and then how they can't be held in anymore, yada, yada, yada. But it's all cell decay. What causes cell decay? Well, your cells replicate, and when they lose the ability to replicate properly, that's how they start to decay. What protects them against this is something called telomeres. Telomeres are what protect you from aging. The shorter your telomeres, the less your lifespan is going to be. Telomeres are always getting shorter. Every time your cells replicate, some of the telomeres are lost, and they get shorter and shorter and shorter. Eventually they run out. Your DNA strands begin to fray at the ends, and the cells can no longer reproduce at all, and you die. What causes telomere length to shorten? It is any number of things. Oxidation, actually. Air is toxic, believe it or not. It's oxygen that's toxic. The more oxygen you have, the faster it oxidizes, your cells decay, and it kills you faster. Unfortunately, you also happen to need it. By the way, also I have here from the Company of Biologists, Journal of Experimental Biology, lifespan in oxidative stress shows a nonlinear response to atmospheric oxygen. As you increase the atmosphere levels, what actually happens is people age and die faster, not slower. And this is according to Journal of Experimental Biology. The reason is because there's more oxygen that you're breathing in. This causes your cells to decay faster. If there was more pressure in ancient times, you would die faster. Further, we did see a picture of the ozone layer. Yes, sun exposure does cause telomeres to get destroyed faster. Thank God nobody in the Bible stayed out in the sun too long. Yes, the ozone may well protect against it, but the ozone layer has been reasonably constant for thousands of years. It's only in the last really 50 or so that it started to go down. So that picture that you showed where you said, well, it was stronger earlier, and then you sort of tried to project back and suggest that it must have been even stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. No, ice atmospheric core samples can tell us how much ozone there was, and there has been a reasonably consistent amount of ozone up until the last ice age, which would have been much further than the Bible even acknowledges that we've had. So they would have had to deal with sun. They would have had to deal. They were also drinkers. They weren't heavy drinkers. The wine that they would drink, they would lace with a good deal of water, so that that kind of countered the effects. But according to a 1916 study, they have discovered that any amount of alcohol actually decreases your lifespan. Alcohol use is a risk factor for death, and the only safe amount of alcohol was 0. And they drank a good deal of alcohol back then. I agree that fruits and vegetables, nuts, fish, other things in the Mediterranean diet would increase lifespan some. But there is nothing that could increase their amount of telomeres, and there is no evidence that there were more telomeres in Neanderthals or any of our prior ancestors. Telomeres seem to be roughly the same length, and there's actually a number of good biological genetic reasons for that. One of the things that ends up happening as well is cancer becomes a problem, other diseases become a problem. There were other diseases and cancers that predate, that have been going back for quite a long time. So at this point, given that I assume they were still breathing air, which is one of the causes of aging, the oxidation damages your telomeres. As soon as your telomeres are exhausted, you're dead. And the telomeres are the best sign of biological age, not chronological age, but biological age. And because of telomere limitations...
1 minute, Nick. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. At present, it is believed that man could never have exceeded 125 without solving that problem, and there's no evidence that our ancestors had longer telomeres or would have been any less subject to radiation, cancer, disease, or these other things I've discussed. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that
Oh,
rebuttal.
no, you really are sitting on the couch for truth, aren't you? You're just sitting there with a stopwatch, having a wine. I say thank you, and you're all like, is he done?
I'm having too much fun here. This is great. So thanks so much for that rebuttal there, Nick. You've given up. So we got 31 seconds that we can add to the discussion. That gives us.
I noticed the language you're using. First, you said I'm on to you, Nick. You said that. Anyone can go, and now you said I've given up. This is why I don't want you to mod anymore. You're biased. I've proven it. We're done.
You could just smell the bias.
Exactly. You threw the
Nick never
camera.
gives up. No worries.
Yeah.
So you know what? That gives us 32 minutes of discussion. So guys, this is going to be a lot of fun. I know the audience is excited. So I guess we can get right into it. Whoever wants to start, whether it's through a question, guys, go ahead. The floor is yours. You got 32 minutes.
All right. I guess I can go first since you said a lot there. Okay, well, telomere length. Yeah, our ancestors didn't actually need longer telomere lengths because telomeres are padding at the end of each chromosome that shorten based on the damage that they do in cell replication, but they don't always have to shorten. Actually, they've actually found a number of things that can actually make them regrow. One of these things you can take, it's called astragaloside 65, or that's the active ingredient. It's called, it's an active ingredient in astragalus root, and it's called astragaloside 65. And they sell a product that's very, very expensive, but it's the active ingredient. And what it does is it boosts telomere length back up very, very high. So it shows that there's a reduction. They've also found that there's a couple things that boost telomere length outside of that. Another really good one is actually a carbon atom, a fullerene number 60. They've actually found that when they inject mice in the stomach with olive oil, with this fullerene number 60, that their telomere length boosted up so much that brown mice that only lived for an average of 2 years were killed after the experiment after 5 years. So Neanderthal, we know, had activated carbon itself because that's how they blew their handprint in cave paintings. They would take this charcoal and blow it, and they would get these mural pictures. So perhaps they could have consumed these things as well. They might have boosted their longevity, their telomeres. The environment, oxygen does cause more oxidative stress. That's why endurance athletes have more oxidative damage than short-term, than people that don't. But these are mitigated based on atmospheric conditions. And since we believe that the older atmosphere was more conducive, not because of the ozone itself, but because we believe that there was a canopy of water over it that fell during the flood. That itself was about 2 to 3 to 4 inches thick, they believe. And that would have changed the atmospheric condition, but have also really instantly repaired the ultraviolet damage, which would have been, shortening the telomeres and things like that as well. But since this is back and forth, go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, if I can add, so when you say they believe or we believe, who precisely is this? What evidence is there for the canopy that you were talking about and this water layer?
The canopy is, I say we, because that's a creationist model. The scientific community doesn't look at a canopy of ancient water that surrounded the earth. It was described in the Bible, and then it's not described in the Bible. It was talking about the fountains of the deep breaking forth, and then a rain for 40 days coming from the firmament. So we believe that it fell then. And when you read the Jewish literature, they believe that the dome was about 3 or 4 inches thick. And that was written down in their old text. That's not there anymore. So we concluded that was probably what made the things live longer, that there was more saturation, that the pressure was higher. You go back in time, the Earth was spinning faster, so there was a different atmosphere. And we see that when we test these things, there's more, and the sap of different things.
Well, we haven't seen that in ice core samples, which can go back far further than what you're talking about. And when you take an ice core sample, one of the great things about the North Pole and the South Pole is that they really haven't been touched by anything but the environment, but the atmosphere for quite a long time. So you can drill a hole very, very far down, and as snow falls, the snow actually traps a bit of the atmosphere in underneath as it falls. It then hardens, crystallizes, and you have atmosphere trapped in the ice. You then get 10, 15, 20, hundreds of feet of ice that show the atmosphere back 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 years. Maybe you can go back and tell what the atmosphere has been doing that far back. And that I'm aware of, there's absolutely no evidence to suggest any of that.
Well, we actually believe that differently when it comes to the ice core layers, because we actually found what's called the Lost Squadron, and the Lost Squadron were a plane that were lost during World War II, and they were when a very rich man wanted to come along and he wanted to buy those planes and he put them on his property or start a museum. Not really sure which one he wanted to do, but he wanted to go find these planes, so he spent a lot of money and he went out there and he assumed that he would just see the planes, but he couldn't. And they were actually so far down that when they actually dug down, they found them, which would have been an equivalent of 135,000 years, because the layers weren't laid down every year. They were laid down by cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot. So the prediction of ice core layers, when they see those strata, which look like they're annual, are actually just dependent on the day or the season, and they can fluctuate and change. So
we've had observers up there since the 60s, and the observers, and I actually know observers who spend 6 months at a time in the Arctic, and that's not what they report actually seeing. That's not what they report how the ice layers are being formed. They're being formed precisely as scientists describe them.
I'm maybe in the poles because it's just continuously cold like that. There.
That's why they take. That's why they have to take that. You cannot take ice core samples from somewhere where the temperature goes to a point where it would melt it. You would then release the atmosphere into the air, and it would be absolutely worthless, and you couldn't do it. You have to do it at a place where there is ice that has been there literally for thousands of years. And there are places on this planet at the poles where ice has existed for thousands of years, and it falls and can be observed to fall in that pattern.
Would you consider Greenland to be one of those places?
I don't know enough, but I would have to say probably not, since as I recall, Greenland does thaw. I've never heard of an ice core sample being taken in Greenland. It may or may not. I'm not. The only ice core samples that I know of are in the Arctic.
Okay, because that's where that's where those planes were found from. They were found in Greenland. So.
Well, Greenland does have some ice that I believe has been around for thousands of years. In fact, no, I know it's got ice that's been around for thousands of years, but I don't know.
I'm sorry to interrupt, guys. I just got some notification from the chat. If we could just move it back to, what the evidence is for humans, whether or not they live to 900 years. Go ahead, guys.
Okay.
All right, I do think the environment has something to do with that, because we're talking about radiation and its effect on human cells, which is absolutely, and I agree with you on that, the picture of the guy with the sun having hit his face, that's exactly what sun damage does. And one of my concerns is the people in the Bible were out in the sun a very good deal. But to move on to a different subject, telomere length, because we were talking about that. One of the reasons that you need shorter telomeres is because that is an insulation against cancer. If your telomeres get too long, or if your telomeres are somehow regenerated, what would end up happening, and what they've actually been able to see in instances where they've been able to do this, which has been spotty at best as I understand it, but they've done it in mice, and what happens is they get cancer. And the reason they get cancer is because the cells are not actually dying off when they should. The truth is, everybody gets cancer all the time, every single day. All of us have loads of cancer cells. Those cells have numerous ways of self-destructing. And in a normal, healthy human being, they will self-destruct and they won't go out of control. What we call cancer is really one of those cells that is reproducing at an alarming rate that cannot be destroyed in and of itself. It won't destroy itself. Every cell has the ability to destroy itself. I forget what the sac is called, but it's a sac of fluid that will rupture and destroy the cell. Or it can be destroyed when it replicates too many times and the telomeres are destroyed. If you either lengthen the telomeres or find a way to regenerate the telomeres, any animal in which you do this would start having a significantly higher quantity of life-threatening cancer, because they're no longer able to destroy cancer cells. This strikes me as a problem.
Well, the telomere pattern, you don't want telomeres too long, but it's actually the reduction that actually causes the biggest problem, because when they take damage, they shorten. So that's what that TA65 does. It boosts them back up. But if the atmospheric was more conducive, which all these animals are showing that they're living longer when they're replicated in these older environments. Of course, no humans actually gotten one, because I guess they don't want to experiment on a human. They should, but the animals live longer, especially the insects. But they don't really match us because they absorb oxygen through their skin. But with the less mutations of ancient human beings, And we know that mutations are what causes diseases in us, and dilapidation, and more disease. And cancer is expected to double within the next 10 years. That's really, really quickly. So if we're compounding these more diseases, then we can go back and we can extrapolate that there's less diseases and less mutations, then we should be able to find a more pure human being. And that's what we believe Adam and Eve were, a less mutation group of people. And then we see more mutations and more diseases and more problems now. Only medical intervention is stepping in now to keep us along. So when we look at the groups of people, in Africa, they say they live about 50 years, but that's only because they take infant mortality into the equation, not
they do.
Total lifespan.
That's true, they do. But I did want to make a point. My uncle is available for human testing. So if they are looking for human testing, he hasn't volunteered, but I know his name and address, and
I think there's a place in Texas that will take him.
Perfect. All right, so let's see, telomere length. Once again, if you find a way to regenerate the telomeres, you're going to have a problem where any kind of uncontrolled reproduction of the cells is no longer. You've just destroyed one of the major mechanisms in stopping uncontrolled reproduction, i.e. stopping cancer. So you're going to see an increase in cancer, and it doesn't matter how you increase it. If you if you rejuvenate the telomeres somehow by a healthy lifestyle, you're going to have that problem. Second of all, oh shoot, I'm sorry. I guess I was trying too much to be clever, and so I've forgotten or lost track of a couple of the comments that you had made. Well, you had said what we expect to see and what we think happened, and that we think Neanderthals were stronger in one way, or because of fewer mutations. Once again, that we kind of concerns me, because I don't think that's the scientific community, and it seems like that's a hypothesis and not really evidence. I will say that the cause of increased mutations so far, there could be any number of things, but at a minimum, I agree with you, we are doing severe damage to our environment. We have done damage to the ozone layer. We've done damage to, we've had multiple nuclear detonations, both underground and on the surface. We've had we've had a number of carcinogens that we've put into our environment. So I think you're going to see mutations go up for those reasons alone. I don't think that you can extrapolate backwards and say, ergo, it was much better back thousands and thousands of years ago. Further, I will add that we have been able to eliminate a lot of diseases that they would have still had at that time, and a number of bacteria we can prove were still there. They did not have antibiotics then. That was a huge boost in our lifestyle. They did not have antibiotics, but they did have bacteria. And that we know, we've been able to find that in amber. So the idea that maybe after Adam and Eve, we had this pristine environment where there were no bacteria or carcinogens or things that could hurt people, I don't see any evidence for that, and a good deal of evidence to the contrary.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you're right. If telomeres never shortened at all, and we could live for 1,000 years, we would die from cancer. It's called senescence, and you're right about that. But the senolytic activators have now been discovered for the first time ever. And what they actually found is, it's quite funny, they're actually found in compounds that our ancestors would have been able to obtain. Matter of fact, they've actually found that in a senolytic activator would be found in red onions and capers. These things are actually shown that they destroy senescence. I don't have any around me. What they do is these, especially when combined with black tea, they've actually found that the theaflavins combined with the quercetin and the other ingredients, they've actually found that they're very, very anti-senolytic. They destroy the cancer buildup that's going in. And since they believe that they just ate these foods on a natural daily basis, because they ate more normal foods, or I should say wild foods outside, that they would have actually been able to destroy the cancer before it actually builds up. But it's such a new avenue of science right now that people they weren't really looking there. They were looking, in the medical field looks at chemicals to kind of fix things. They don't really look at herbalism.
But they've looked at cancer rates in the Mediterranean, and people who still have that diet, and while admittedly in some cases they do have a lower cancer rate, it's by a few percentage points. To suggest that the diet and these things that you say they would have had ready access to, people eat those things right now, and there are some cultures that have been eating those things for the last 200 years and have not produced or shown a significant reduction in cancer.
Yeah, but remember the Pottinger study, when they actually took the animals' normal diet and they put them on a cooked food diet. These are animals in zoos. By the fourth generation, they had horrible mutation problems and everything, because you took what they were designed to do and messed it up, kind of like humans today. You take humans back then, which were obeying what God told them to consume and we're telling them to eat. We believe that those cancers, those mutations, these glycation or advanced glycotic end products won't be building up. When you go to Burger King, you get horribly advanced glycotic end products because they process their foods and they're cooked, they're roasted by fire, and they're horrible. That's why they found that certain people age much faster. They have identical twins, and when you test an identical twin, one will have cancer but the other won't. It's because of their lifestyle choices. So we believe that these lifestyle choices are what allow these people to live for so much longer. Also, the germline is the mutation load of that's passed on to the next generation that gets compounded. Those are the ones that kind of build up. They're the ones that accumulate by 63 to 64 mutations every single generation by the Icelandic people. They actually found from them. So these, if we extrapolate that and we go by 64 mutations every single generation, and we just do the simple math, we don't use the phylogenetic testing method, which we presume that there's a common ancestor 65 million years ago, but we just do 64 and then we minus that every 25 years generation, and we go back to ground zero. We go back about 6,000 years to Adam, which is ground zero for mutation rate. And so that's why sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, please finish.
That's why Dr. Jensen predicted the extinction of the human race in 350 generations, and right now we're in the 300th generation. So his prediction is based on this mutational load of slightly deleterious mutations that constantly build problems. That's why if you look at what causes this cancer, prostate cancer, what causes breast cancer, it's a mutation of the BRCA1 and 2 gene. What causes prostate cancer? It's another mutation of another gene. So if we know that mutations are correlated with all these different diseases, but you take these mutations away with the original people, they don't have to worry about those diseases. They don't have to worry about those cancers. So we believe that the more pure and stronger we can get these genetics, the stronger the people were. Like, for example, I don't want you to have gray hair, for example, right? So I say the graying of hair is a weakness of the liver, the shutdown of a metabolic enzyme called glutathione reductase and glutathione peroxidase. And it's what reduces a buildup of hydrogen peroxide in the body, which bleaches your hair white. So if you take a herb called Polygium multiflorum, also known as faux tie, it boosts this glutathione level and it makes your gray hair go away. So if the ancients had better livers, better genetics, less mutations, we believe that they could have lived a very long time. And that post that I did show on my thing where it showed that the Neanderthal tested for genes, that wasn't a creationist test. That was actually a scientific thing. I actually made a video on it on Standing for Truth's channel, which showed that they did the mutational load and they found Neanderthal only had a handful, but modern day has hundreds. So.
All right. I think I'm gonna reiterate sort of a similar objection, which was there was a lot of we believe, including sort of early on, and I'm not. I think it's difficult to find scientific evidence in support of most of these claims. I do agree with some of the broader ones. Our food habits are extraordinarily destructive to us. There is no evidence that I've seen that is sufficient enough. And I think it's an interesting argument. Okay, if human beings for generations have been eating poor foods, then that would have changed us enough that we would no longer be the same species. Well, not the same species. Let me rephrase that. The damage was so progressive enough. I think this is what you're saying, that even today, if we were to eat all the proper foods, we would not see the full benefits that they would have seen 6,000 years ago. My objection to that is that we still discover on occasion new tribes in the Amazon. We've discovered new tribes in, what was the most recent one, that have much closer to what I think you would consider proper eating habits, and they have not been exposed to modern civilization. And to the best of my knowledge, every one of them that we've discovered has a normal lifespan, or at least what we would consider to be a normal lifespan as well.
Okay, I'll answer that one. Africa. I'll just making a note. So do you believe then, yourself, that humans today soon will live to 1,000 years by turning on these old genes? Do you think that?
Well, to me, as far as I understand, the biggest problem is the telomeres. And we have found a few interesting things about telomeres that we can, in fact, affect them, which is new information, but the effect that we've been able to exert is very minor. There are lobsters which have lived over 1,000 years. I mean, a lobster 1,000 years old. We are still trying to understand how the lobster can get away with that, because we're all insanely jealous. But so we're still trying to figure that out, and I think that hypothetically, if we could solve a whole bunch of problems that we barely even know exist yet, perhaps, but to the best of our scientific understanding, the biggest problem is the telomeres. Nobody has even a hypothetical way or a theoretical way to solve that problem. Every solving of that problem causes other problems that would end up being prohibitive. You also have additional problems with life expectancy, which is even if you fix the telomeres, you can still have other diseases that crop in and shorten life expectancy. So I think the 1,000, I'm a little tired, forgive me. Well, the 125 cap that we sort of currently see as the standard cap is likely to be around for a little while. And if we make any significant changes, to it, we're going to be lucky to do much more than 10, 15, maybe 20% tops would be my experience, my educated guess, having no experience in the field.
All right. The lobster, good one. That was actually based on, they have a built-in high amount of metabolic enzyme called superoxide dismutase. They produce hundreds. Like, for example, you have a sea turtle. They produce about 250 micrograms per deciliter of superoxide dismutase. They live about 250 years. Humans only produce about 80 right now. So anyway, that was the answer to that one. Did you know when they find these lost tribes?
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah. The more superoxide dismutase your body can make, the longer you can live. And I have a list of things that can boost that up. Real quick for the audience.
That's a antioxidant?
Yes, it's the most powerful antioxidant. Your liver makes it. Basically, your liver makes superoxide dismutase, and then it makes glutathione peroxidase to break down the hydrogen peroxide that the superoxide dismutase did. So it's kind of like a ladder. It breaks these things down. But our liver stops functioning well at age 27.
Sitting on the couch for truth, could I have your attention for a second? Somebody in the live chat was giving me a hard time saying, what? Breathing is toxic? Did Nick really just say that? He just agreed with me. I want you to find that guy and say, no. Thank you. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I'll find him for you, Nick.
I appreciate it.
Least I could do for you. Keep her going, guys. Keep her going.
All right. I'm starting to get a little tapped out. I apologize. I did not. I probably couldn't do anything about it. I'm starting to get a little tired and a little wonky. I can certainly continue for a bit longer, but I apologize. I didn't have the specs for the debate until just a short while ago, and I was not as prepared as I'd like to be. I apologize. But I can keep going. So let's keep going until either I collapse or I say something really stupid, which most people would say I've already done several times in this debate already.
No problem. You guys are doing great. The audience is having a good time. We've got exactly 9 minutes left. So
I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead, guys.
Well, if it's only 9 minutes and he's going to go after that, we could Q&A for audience. How's that?
I like that plan. Let's do it.
Deal. That sounds good.
We've got concluding statements if you wanted to kind of just sum everything up in case either of you felt anything was left open-ended. You can do a quick concluding statements. Up to you guys.
I'm happy either way.
Yeah, same either way.
You got it.
Give me 1-2 minutes, I guess.
Deal.
Yeah, let's each do 2 minutes. I think that's perfect.
Okay. Want to go first? Go ahead.
Oh, sure, I'll go first, but if you keep being this reasonable, I'm going to have to like you, and then I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. So please do something unreasonable pretty soon. All right, well, thank you very much. I certainly enjoyed it. Once again, I think he said a lot of things that have some grounding in truth. But I think perfect. Oh, perfect. Actually, no, I just like him more. Okay, that's a problem. Oh God.
Hello there, Pharaoh Matt.
I can get my sword. All right, I won't do that just yet. I'll wait till he says something that I don't like. I think a lot of what he says has significant grounding in truth. Oh God, I can't believe I just said that. Has significant grounding in science. But I think a lot of it also ends up being speculation. I think it ends up being speculation with an assumption that the Bible is true. And again, so far in the past, what usually ends up happening in my experience is when the Bible and science collide, oh my God, he didn't just do that. Okay. When the science and the Bible collide, the Bible usually ends up having to be reinterpreted in some way to explain why it's not what we're finding in the world. And if you keep doing it, you can keep doing that ad infinitum and just keep doing it and keep doing it. And that's sort of where we are now, which is, well, okay, science has found all these things. So within that framework, how can we say that there was dome of water, and how can we continue working with our assumption that the Bible is true and fit it in with what's actually being discovered? There is no evidence that people lived to be this long. I think there is significant evidence that they did not. There is certainly no reason I can find to think they did. And while there is reason to think that they had some things that would help them live a little bit longer, most of that is mitigated by a number of things that would actually shorten their lifespan. But at any rate, I think that's about it. Thank you again, and I'll move on to King Tut over there.
All right.
Well, thank you so much there for your concluding statement, Nick. King Tut or King Matt, you got the floor. We got a couple minutes there.
All right. Well, the topic was could people have lived to 900? And I think with the evidence that we have, that I can prove that. When we look at the bones, if we look at the thickness of the strontium levels and the thickness of the bones and the fact that they can repair things that we can no longer repair, the fact that if you look at the physical abilities of them, they could run faster. They found a place in Australia dubbed the foot tracks called T8, where they found a Neanderthal man decided to just take off running arbitrarily. We don't know if he was running away from something or towards something, but he got up to speeds of 27 miles an hour. This is some random average Neanderthal. Vastly superior than us. So when we have these mutation buildup and then we have more disease now, we can logically conclude that we had less in the past. So if disease is what's killing us today, the majority of us, they think 1 out of every 2 people are going to die from cancer. That doesn't even bring into consideration of heart disease and diabetes and other diseases that are all regulated or determined by what we're eating and our environment. So if you have what we ate better and you have a better environment, then it's kind of logical to conclude that ancient man was better. And when you look at the bones and you see the structural differences and how strong the ancient man was and how superior they were, you just kind of wonder, like, well, I could see how they could live longer. But then we have the dental evidence too, which shows that their enamel was repairing itself. So we can't look at dental evidence and extrapolate that, well, they had a little bit, so they must have been dying at 35. Well, yeah, if they were healing though, it's a little bit different then. You can't really compare it. It's like a muscle. If it's regenerating, you can't look at a muscle and guess of its age because it's repairing itself. So it's not a very good indicator anymore. So if we have a more conducive environment, less mutations, I think that humans could have definitely lived extremely long amounts of time. And I think that the evidence is good. And the evidence is inside of us, and it's locked away, and it's locked up in dormant genes that are now turned off that were once turned on. We turn them back on again. I think that, we have 7 sirtuins. We have the FOXO genes. We have we have a list. I think there's over 16 that they've discovered, and who knows how many more they're going to find. Human beings have 19,000 genes inside of us. And they're only...
That would be 2 minutes, Matt.
My bad.
Thank you very much from both of our speakers. We appreciate your speeches and want to remind everybody that their links are in the description. So if you enjoy their content, well, you can get more right there. We're going to move into the Q&A. So Standing for Truth, what we'll do is just switching back and forth, reading each question, and we can start with the Super Chats. I forgot to mention earlier, Super Chats, basically the way we do it at the channel is, if you're new, You can make a comment toward one of the debaters if you want. They, of course, would get a chance to quickly respond. And then the super chats will just go to the top of the list. We're going to try to keep, however, today, just to keep it as short as possible so our speakers, let's see, so we respect their time, especially given...
Oh, please, Matt Tutt has been doing this for at least 2,000 years.
So we closed the Q&A, so like we're going to try to move short and sweet through this. Standing for Truth, if you want to read off that first super chat from Stephen Steen, you can.
Stephen Steen's about to give us all a good laugh, and laughter's the best medicine. So Stephen Steen, super chat. Thanks for your super chat there, Stephen. He says, dangerous debate, question mark. Not as dangerous as James' smile.
Ooh.
Oh, he's got an admirer.
Don't encourage him.
That's your own fan club, James.
He's a sick man, but we appreciate.
Well, that goes without saying.
Yes, he's always trolling me. I don't know but we appreciate that super chat. Thanks, Stephen, for being here and hanging with us. We had one from Sigifredo Sarabia. Thanks for your super chat as well. He asked, did every iguana become a dragon? Where did they go?
But did every dragon become an iguana?
I think it was, I think my guess is...
I think that may be what I think he may have switched what he meant.
Maybe, that could be.
Because we still have iguanas, and we don't have dragons. So I can't believe he meant that the way he wrote it.
I wonder...
Either that or I need to take mescaline. One of the two.
You got it? I don't know if it was... Okay, well, Sigifredo's, I'm watching the chat in case you want to clarify. I will keep an eye out. He just shot in another one as well. Thanks for your super chat, Sigifredo. He asked, how do you use Neanderthals as defense for the 6,000-year-old Earth?
So, I'm guessing that one's to me. So Neanderthal, when they tested them, they found they have the exact same components as modern human beings. They were just they have the same blood type. Primates don't have the same blood types. They have the same genes that are shared by us. They found that they have red hair. They didn't have black hair. They found that they had freckles. They found that they have they made clothing. They even found a Neanderthal in Europe that actually had chainmail on them. That was incredible. So we know that they were human based on their genetics. It's not just like some assumption where I'm like, oh, just Neanderthal men. They look close enough. You know, they're probably human. Nah, it's pretty understandable. I think even most creationists now assume that Neanderthal are full humans. They weren't some new species that had nothing to do with us. Different species can't interbreed and make children. Neanderthal and human beings made it. So they were human beings. So.
You got it. Standing for Truth. You've got the next one, bud.
Okay, so I've got Ronald Mendonca here. Thanks for your super chat, Ronald. He says Chewbacca, 234 years old. Gandalf, 11,000 years old. Yoda, 900 years old. These and Bible stories are just that, stories.
Well, I assume that was to me, and I think I just lost the debate. I can't beat the Chewbacca defense. We all know that. Anyone who's seen South Park knows you cannot beat the Chewbacca defense. It's over. It was nice. I appreciate everyone's time.
Well, we appreciate your time too, Nick.
We do have. I'm going to quick read through one that just came in addition to Mitchell's. Thanks for your super chat, Mitchell. He is just a no comment, but we appreciate your super chat. It means a lot to have your support. And also, forgive me, Raw Matt, if you had a response that you wanted to say to that last super chat, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had
on Yoda, I never met the guy.
Okay, you got it. And Jake 3D, thanks for your super chat. He says, I must have academic sources for 25 mile per hour Neanderthals.
Absolutely. I'll screen share. Hold on.
Super interesting.
Yeah, I was curious about that one too. There was one or two where I wanted sources. I can maybe go into the super chats and ask for sources.
If I can quick ask a question to the chat, I'm curious. we have Slam mentioned we have some sort of like warning as you enter into the channel. Is that true? Like when people clicked into the channel, did they say something about like warning you may be viewing offensive content? I I don't know why that would be, but
I can check.
I don't think she's fibbing. I don't think she's joking, but
I'm
it might
sure
not be
she's
everybody.
not.
And I'm like, I think we have such an innocuous channel. I know that we like,
I know I'm pretty hardcore, man, but this is really.
yes, that's right, Nick.
Sorry if I got you demonetized.
It's
I really am.
Nick, you got to tone it down. You're hurting way too many feelings in here.
They expected some violence out of this one, huh?
Nick got us. I don't. Okay, so Willie Mays fan said he did not get a warning. Brangel didn't get one. Cody, Frank, Walter, Will. Thanks. Maybe it was just Slam. I wonder if it could be that Slam. Maybe your settings are set for like more tame content, and I guess we're once in a while we're a little controversial because we've had some people in the past.
It
I
may
think
just
that's
be
what-
Matt's outfit there. It could be Matt's outfit.
That's a,
Oh, yeah, that'll do.
that's,
So I just came in on
I'm feeling rather offended right now. No, I'm just kidding.
I came in on a signed out account and I got nothing. I can see the live debate. Everything's good on my end.
Huh, that's weird. I think it's because of Matt's cultural appropriation. That's pretty bad, Matt. But
Him and Kim Kardashian, we're gonna have to.
triggered. Okay, so we appreciate. Thanks for that. I appreciate the feedback. By the way, it is true though that one thing that's weird is we do sometimes. I don't know if it's because of the last video that we have. Sometimes if we have a controversial debate prior, the next video will be automatically demonetized, and it's not a big deal. Like we're not doing it for I'm doing it because I just love it. But it is true that like for software upgrades and stuff like that, Photoshop, we're happy to be monetized. And sometimes it's even one time we had a debate that was I think quasi controversial, and the next video I uploaded was the channel trailer. It only had music, no words, and it got demonetized. I was like, what? Like what? It doesn't-
That's the one to get demonetized actually, because you could always just. I mean, you're not selling ads during the trailer, are you? I mean, that's the
Right.
perfect one to get demonetized. Now you can do an Aaron Raw or something else like that, and you're gonna be fine.
I don't know. I mean, I think we're pretty easygoing. But anyway, all right, Standing for Truth. If you want to read the next one, we'll keep moving. But thanks for that feedback.
No problem. So it looks like I got a question here from Emotionally Stunted Emoticon. So he asks, this is a question for Raw Matt. He asks, isn't it particularly strange that these unusually old ages were mostly, and then in brackets he says, if not always, attributed to men? Seems a bit egotistical to me, to not mention animals. Go ahead, Matt.
I don't think they cared about studying animals at all back then. That's more current kind of research. People back then, animals were considered servitude. They weren't meant to be eaten. It was meant like a cattle for pulling a plow, things like that. Animals weren't for anything but for man. We have dominion over them. We weren't supposed to kill them, slaughter and do bad things to them. We test them for different things. People were just kind of it would be pets, kind of like a dog. You test on and beat on your dog. But, I don't think vivisection was very popular pre-flood. And as for James, I can't post the information that person wanted. So what I'll do is I'll real quick read. Anthropologist Peter McAllister recently published a book called Manthroponology, The Science of the Inadequate Man, an analysis on the footsteps of one of the men's footprints preserved in a fossil clay bed in Australia, dubbed TH, showed that he reached 37 kilometers on soft, muddy lake bed edge. So that was for a reply earlier. I hope I answered emotionally stunted. I hope that's kind of what he was asking.
Standing for Truth, if you can read the next several questions, and then also, I am finally, forgive me, I got sidetracked earlier. I'm putting Nick's actual webpage in the description because I said I do that at the beginning of the stream. I'm doing it literally right now. So,
And my YouTube channel, I'd appreciate as well if it's
you betcha.
Nicholas Lamar Soutter. Yeah, thank you so much.
Gladly.
Okay, so it looks like I got the next question here then from Richard Madsen. Another question for Matt. He asks, would ancient oxygen levels be before Homo sapien, even in a Darwinistic evolutionary model? Go ahead, Matt.
Before, we believe in kind of like irreducible complexity. You can't have everything's tied together at once. So if there's no real oxygen, you have a big problem. I know that the theory of abiogenesis has to remove oxygen because the left-hand amino acids, nothing can really form if the formation of oxygen is present because of oxidation. So they had to remove oxygen from the theory, but that's not what we actually found. As my presentation kind of showed, that they actually found that by testing early meteorites, they actually found that the oxygen content was more than it is today. So it's not less like they predicted. So I guess that answers that one. I can scroll up and show you again.
Okay, thanks for the answer there, Matt. Unless you had something to say, Nick, I can go on to the next one.
I think he went AFK.
I did not go AFK. You have absolutely no faith. I just wanted to demonstrate that you would actually keep making an argument against an empty chair, which is called an empty chair interview and is very disingenuous. I have nothing to say. Thank you. Keep going.
There's my screen.
Awesome.
I normally most people who see my debates know this. I sometimes have to walk, and that's why I have a wireless headset so I can still hear everything. So it's like they see the chair. People who haven't seen me before. So James knows. I figured he'd bail me out and say, "Yeah, Nick is still there. I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm listening. Every word you say. I'm completely listening." In.
Hey, Nick, you're walking for truth, man. Nothing wrong with that. So next question from Saint Knight. Thanks for your question. This one's for Matt again. Matt, you're very popular tonight. What about this passage?
He's cheating. He took off his shirt. Of course he's getting all those super chats. I would listen. I'd take off my shirt too, but all the super chats would be, Nick, put your shirt back on.
I always thought Halloween was in October, but party on.
All right, Lynn.
Okay, so the passage. So he says, what about this passage? Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. I think that's in Genesis. He doesn't specify, though.
Well, that was talking about the people after the flood. He was very disappointed in man and how sinful they were and how their heart was continuously filled with contempt and evil. And so he said he regretted that he had made man to live for so long, and so he reduced the age. So after the flood, you see a dramatic decline in the parameters of how long people were to live. And now look around, we don't actually pass that 125-year-old mark, which is mentioned. So it's pretty good prediction on that.
Okay, thanks for the answer. You know what? We got a question here for Nick. So get ready, Nick. Someone's coming after you. His name is Praise I Am That I Am. His question is, thanks for the question there, Praise. He says, how can you not believe humans lived longer thousands of years ago when genomes were pristine and much longer? Go ahead, Nick.
Well, first of all, there's a number of reasons. The length would have absolutely nothing to do with it. The biggest thing that would have something to do with it would first of all be violence. It was a much more violent time, and by the way, and we had discussed this before, but there's two issues here. First is the average life expectancy. The second is what's the top, because violence was also a much bigger problem in ancient, in the Bible times than today, by no small margin. Having said that, if you could survive that, the question is, okay, then what really is the life expectancy based on your biology? And given the fact that we can expect that, and all indications are that the environment was reasonably the same, and that in fact there were other problems with foodborne illnesses if they weren't prepared properly, other diseases that we have now dealt with. Some were reasonably new, some have been around for quite some time. There's no reason to expect that life expectancy would have been any higher, if probably in fact lower. And in fact that's what we see. And again, the current life expectancy for Neanderthal was about 35 years old.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that answer there, Nick. We'll go right into the next one then. This one is from Steven Steen. Question for Raw Matt. If God made 900-year-old humans, James would have been his first pick. Checkmate, Nick. Ooh, Steven's back at it with the compliments again.
I keep getting my butt handed to me on this one. This is this is not going well.
At least you're a good sport about it, Nick. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Come back anytime.
All right.
We had just right
This
now.
isn't even your channel. Wait a minute, James is the one.
Wait a minute, James. Where'd you go?
We had just had a super chat. Jake 3D, thanks for your super chat. Who said, "Matt, you are denying quote unquote God by trying to extend life."
Well, if he created man to live forever and sin brought death into the world, we're not trying to live forever. We're just trying to extend our lifespan. It's like saying, there's no reason to eat better anymore. I guess it's just better to get over with. No, God wants you to be healthy and happy and live a long time, or else he would have never created us to be that way. So, it's kind of strange to say that he doesn't, we glorify God in our health. We can't glorify God if we're sick and in the hospital and dying. Matter of fact, that's when most people blame God for their problems. We're supposed to be healthy and happy and helping others. Kind of odd to say that it's denying God. I don't know. He made people to live forever.
Gotcha. And really quick, before we get to more questions, I want to quick call attention to the fact that this is, I just saw it, like I said, on Nick's Twitter. So I'm pulling up your debate poster for your upcoming debate with Kent Hovind, which is going to be, I'm sure, exciting. And I just want to let people know about it. We want you in the audience to have your choice of, we want to let you know about debates no matter where they are, so that you can say, yeah, sure, I'll check it out over there. Nick, is this going to be at your channel, or is it going to be at Kent Hovind or another one?
It's at his channel, Kent Hovind's channel. I believe it's the 28th. Is Evolution True?
Very exciting. Let's see. I think technically, forgive me, I know this is not tactful, but just because it's so important to me that people know the exact date, because I want them to enjoy the debate.
It's the 25th. You're right. Whatever it says there is correct.
You betcha. That's going to be a huge one. In fact,
I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So, man, I think that'll be a blast. So hopefully people...
I will say this. When I spoke with him on the phone, he thought he's just like, well, you're being kind of a nice guy, and you're an atheist. I don't know that I believe this. He doesn't like no.
Jake gets death threats. He gets people tapping into his bank accounts. He gets some pretty big haters out there.
And then he gets Nick acting all nice and kind. See, there is some hope out there.
He didn't know what to do with himself. he really, but he was great, and everybody was great on the whole thing, and that's the date.
Awesome. Well, I'll be front row seats for that. So, did you want to get to the next question, James?
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So this, let me see here. Raphael Block, his question. It doesn't specify anybody, but let me see it. He asked, since humans lived 900 years before the flood and 90 after, wasn't eating meat the cause? I suspect that's for you, Matt.
They believe that it was, because they think that there wasn't much to eat besides the animals that were brought on the ark, the 7 clean versions. That they believe that
7 clean pairs, and I have to correct you on that because it is so rare I get to correct someone who knows more about the Bible than I do. It was 7 clean pairs.
Right. Yeah. So they think that's what the descendants of Noah were eating. The 7 clean pairs of animals. So yeah. But that's what the Noah movie actually with what was his name? The most recent one where the rocks came alive.
Russell Crowe, yeah.
Yeah, the Russell Crowe one. That's what caused the flood, was the evilness towards animals and killing and starting to eat them. But that movie was pretty crazy, like Lord of the Rings.
That was a big one. We appreciate Sigifredo Sarabia. Thanks for your super chat. Just fired it in to the live chat. He said, Matt, if Thoth, king of Atlantis, extending 36,000 years, only lived to 50, would this historical account make any difference in the age of man or fairy tale?
Well, you got to take into consideration where that was written and by their mathematical system, kind of like the Sumerians one, using the sexagesimal base 60. You know what I mean? So when you read theirs, you get extremely high age. Reigns of kings for 36,000 years and things like that. It's just because their multiplication was very, very different. So I would just say look at their system of what they're talking about, and you'll find a kind of a correlation between the different groups of people, from the Persians to the Chinese and the things like that. They all have nothing past 1,000 years. So it's odd when you see one or two that are thousands and thousands of years. It doesn't add up. So when you investigate it, usually you find out it's their math system that made the mistake. So not really a problem for us.
You got it. Thanks so much.
Okay, so I got the next question here. Oh, I'm sorry, James.
Nope, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So next question again from Raphael Block. He says, Adam and Eve had fewer mutations, but with all that incest in the earliest few generations, why no bad mutations? I guess that's for you as well, Matt.
Well, because they wouldn't have been married. Since there's no real mutations, there's nothing inherently degradative, like really, really bad. If there's less mutations, there isn't going to be much to pass on as far as mutation goes. So they've actually found that there's an article called Go Ahead and Kiss Your Cousin, and they found that most very rich and royal families marry their first cousin, and they don't have genetic issues at all. Matter of fact, they actually found to have more family members. They actually can, without error whatsoever. It's when you marry direct brother and sister that it becomes a problem, and that law didn't actually come out in the scripture to not marry your brother or your inside your family until about 1,500 years later. So by then we would have assumed that was when it became a genetic issue. So in the original, there's no bad mutations to actually have a problem with that, but they didn't marry direct brother and sister for very, very long after. So they would have been marrying like cousins, because they spread out. They were told to reproduce and go throughout the world. And so that's kind of what humans do. We're traveling nomadic. So they wouldn't have had too much problems with that. But yeah, of course, nowadays with the mutational load that we have, you can't do that. But back then it would have been no problem genetically.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to jump back in with you, Standing for Truth. Galaxy, or Godless Galaxy, thanks for your question. We appreciate it. This is for Raw Matt, and it is, do you know that the planes from World War II in Greenland, where they landed, were in ice sheets that seasonally melt? Which wouldn't that disprove your idea of ice cores?
Well, yeah, but if they said seasonally melt, then the planes would have been actually visible. So if they just melted every year that the ice would build up, then the guy looking for the planes wouldn't have had to bore down 130,000 years through ice core layers to find the planes, which is what happened. So if they were melting, think about it. Like, okay, I land a plane, and then it snows on it, and then it melts by the next season, and then the next season comes and melts again. Well, the planes are still sitting there; they'd be visible. So I find that very weird, logically, to say that, well, if they melt every year, then how come they're under ice still? So,
gotcha. Standing for Truth.
Awesome. Okay, looks like we got Walter White here from Breaking Bad. So thanks for your question, Walter. He asks, this one's for Nick. Looks like it's the last question that I've got, at least. He says, have you read, it's a tough one to say, have you read Kierkegaard or Hegel? I didn't butcher that too bad. And if yes, would you convince Matt that take of Christianity is more fun than the young earth cult, Hegel, lead, Marx, even to communism? That's for you, Nick.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to get the wind talkers on that one. I think I got it. It's been a while since I've read Hegel, and I've never read Kierkegaard. I probably should, especially if he's as much fun as it sounds like. I think Matt Tutt should definitely pick a more fun religion, but frankly, this is going to be the first time I've been in a debate with somebody who's been wearing that, and I have a hard time imagining having a better time. So I'm happy. We'll save that for the next debate. The next debate will be, if you were just picking a religion based solely on how much fun you had, which would it be? And we'll enjoy that one. And he'll have to wear that again, because I have to tell you, I am never going to be on another platform with Matt Tutt over there without him wearing that. That's going to be just part of the requirements from now on. If he doesn't wear it, I'm not coming.
You're gonna have to wear that. I agree, actually. Matt, that can be like part of your like persona. You can always wear that.
I guess
That
I'm
was a big
moderating.
mistake on it. That's a big mistake on his part. It's
Appreciate that. And last question, Utopia Blaster. We appreciate your question. He asks, or he says, I don't have a question, but would like to thank Nick and Matt for making an otherwise insignificant topic very interesting. So it's really nice of you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Definitely enjoyed. I enjoyed it as well. This has been. We've never had this topic. I don't think I've actually ever seen this topic at all. Like this is something that people would.
Nobody wants to debate on this. On my
Right.
side.
Yeah. So this is definitely new and fun. And if you enjoyed it, if you're watching, one of the most direct ways to help other people see this debate, if you think it was fun and worth watching, is to hit that like button. Just give it that engagement. And we appreciate you being here for your questions, for just all of your support. I have to say that all the time, like this channel is truly like the debaters and the audiences, because the debaters make it happen. We can't thank them enough for choosing to come on to Modern Day Debate. And also, so many good questions come from you in the audience, like constantly. I feel like pretty much all of them. Like I'm just shooting out emails, and I love that you guys are so helpful. So thanks for that.
Live. All right. Well, thank you, folks, for joining us. My name's Kent Hovind. I'm with Nick Soutter in Massachusetts. You say your degrees are in psychology and philosophy?
Yep.
Okay, and you're a writer, and you want to discuss the topic, is the theory of evolution true? And I hope Rhonda told you we want you to go first and take as long as you want. I don't care about the clock much, just so we get equal time. You want to go first and tell us why you think evolution is true?
Sure. I do have, so I actually have a presentation, so I'm going to try this screen share. And the other thing is the audio won't share on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the headset and put the mic right up to and you should be able to hear. We've tested this a couple times. It seems to have worked beautifully. And so let me give this a shot here. And you have been very gracious about the time, which I sincerely appreciate. So thank you.
As far as
there we are.
Yeah, if evolution's true, everything ought to get better automatically. So the text would be a problem.
All right. So I think you should be able to see that now.
Yes, sir. I see it fine.
All right. And let me start it and get the audio going. Thank you. Should be. It's about 12 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, and that is not coming across. The audio is not coming out on that. So let me try one more time here. I apologize for the audio. The audio still is not coming out on that. Let me, okay, let me try one more thing here. Yeah, there we are. All right. Let's try this one more time here. Thank you for your patience.
And they say, do you eat shellfish? You tell them you do. And they say, well, doesn't the Bible say that eating shellfish is an abomination? Well, of course it does. But right off the bat, you know that this atheist didn't learn the Bible from a minister. He doesn't know the first thing about the Bible. He doesn't understand the difference between Mosaic law and the New Covenant. Now, you can try to explain this to him all you'd like, but if he's already made up his mind that he's right and you're wrong, and that somehow he understands the Bible better than you do, he's not going to approach you with an open mind. He's going to say everything you say is a cop-out, and he's not going to give it a fair hearing. If someone really wants to understand the Bible, who should they go to? An atheist or a skeptic like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins? People who say they understand it, but who never went to seminary and don't even believe it? No, the Bible is complex, with many messages which, improperly understood, could lead one to a false understanding of God's word. If you want to understand the Bible, you go to a minister or theologian, someone who believes it, someone who understands the big picture and can explain it in context. Evolution is very much the same thing. It's complex. It isn't easily understood. If you want to learn what evolution truly claims, you shouldn't go to Ken Ham or to a creationist, but to an evolutionary biologist, someone who has dedicated their life to understanding it and who believes it. Now, you don't have to believe what they tell you, but at least least you know you'll be getting the correct information from the horse's mouth. Even other scientists, like physicists or engineers, usually aren't qualified to give in-depth answers about evolution. It simply isn't their field. Evolution is not simply a fact. It's a theory. You may think that a theory is what you see on television, a cop who says that he has a theory of the crime, or a lawyer who has a theory of the case. But the word theory actually means something extraordinarily different in science. In science, theories are much bigger than laws. They're much bigger than facts, and they are, in fact, the highest form of knowledge one can have. Every scientist dreams of making a theory. That's the end goal, but only a very few rare geniuses ever succeed in doing it. Gravity is just a theory, but nobody would say it's not true or that it's just a guess. Atomic theory powers our country and destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If you think germ theory is just a theory, stop washing your hands and tell your doctor he doesn't need to use sterile equipment before surgery. The theory of relativity is so powerful it allowed us to land a man on the moon and bring him back alive again in one piece. But theories aren't simple things. They're complex and can only be understood as a whole. When viewed as individual little parts, it looks silly, and just like many pieces of the Bible. You need context to understand the full picture. And like the Bible, you're not going to grasp it in 5 or 10 minutes. If you ever dismissed evolution as just a theory, or asked if evolution is real, why are there still monkeys, or argued that, hey, it doesn't show how life started, or pointed out that there are no transitional fossils, or suggested that an elephant can come from an ear of corn, you're making statements just as ignorant as the atheist who says, well, if God loves us, why does he send people to hell? In fact, all fossils are transitional fossils. Evolution does not try to explain how life started. And most importantly, evolution, in fact, does not allow for one kind of animal to become another kind of animal. When a biologist says a different kind of animal, what they really mean is just a new species. But all species are always the same kind. No animal has become a different kind of animal, and if one ever did, evolution would be dead as a theory. Corn will always produce other kinds of corn, and elephants always will produce another kind of elephant. And if none of this makes sense to you, if you think this is all contrary to what you understand about evolution, then you have been grossly misinformed. The idea of evolution has been around since the ancient Greeks. They noticed that they could breed animals and select for strength, stamina, or speed, depending on what they needed. Using what they learned, we've invented entirely new species of crops like wheat and corn, neither of which exist in nature. The process of making these things is called artificial selection. When a species reproduces, there are tiny random changes in traits. We select the traits that are desirable, breed those, while ignoring the ones we don't want. The shorter the life cycle of the plant or animal, the faster we can do this. With crops, we can see significant changes quite quickly. With animals, it takes a lot longer. It occurred to the Greeks that perhaps all living things evolve, and that one species can turn into another over time. The problem is that since all these traits were random, it won't work without something guiding the process of selecting the more desirable traits over the less desirable ones. This was a problem that went unsolved until a man by the name of Charles Darwin made a startling discovery. He realized that there was, in fact, a natural process for selecting these traits. He called this natural selection. Darwin began mapping species, figuring out their origin, and trying to establish where they came from based on how they interacted in the environment. He was so successful at this, he was able to predict new species that nobody had ever seen before. The evolution of the star orchid, he realized, couldn't have occurred unless there was a moth with a 2-foot tongue flying around somewhere. He was laughed out of the scientific community for that claim, and yet shortly after his death, that moth was actually found. But he also discovered that the further back in time he went, the more these ancestors started to look a lot like each other. He realized that by going back far enough, species all came from a common ancestor. Now, Darwin was a Christian, and this was not the answer he was looking for. Indeed, this threw him into a crisis of faith. It put him at odds with his friends, his family, his community, to say nothing of the fact that scientists thought it was ludicrous. But he continued and pretty soon created a rudimentary tree of life. Now, we use the tree of life to map which species came from where and how every species is related to each other. It looks complicated, but really it's no different from a family tree. We as species have ancestors, we have cousins, we have distant cousins, and just like your family tree, where no member can jump from one branch to another, no kind of species can actually jump from one kind or one branch to another kind. Now, people argue that because there are gaps in our knowledge, that proves it's not true. But gaps don't disprove anything. There are gaps in the Bible. The Bible doesn't record every reign of every king. It doesn't record the ancestry of absolutely every person from Adam to Paul. Jesus, whose life and death is literally the topic of the New Testament, and the Bible doesn't even record when he was born, when he died, or where he was buried. Now, does that mean that Jesus wasn't real? Does it mean the crucifixion wasn't real? Of course not. Gaps in our knowledge doesn't disprove evolution. If you want to disprove evolution, you have to find predictions that it makes that in fact turns out to be false. Any one genuine contradiction is enough to bring the entire system down. If you find a kangaroo fossil in the wrong sedimentary layer or dated to the wrong time, it's over. Find an amphibian fossil that's older than the oldest fish fossil, and evolution is dead and buried. Find a mammal that has feathers anywhere in the world, and evolution is gone. But after millions of species cataloged, after trillions of fossils found, not one has contradicted the theory as we understand it. What's more, the theory of evolution explains biological mysteries that have gone unanswered for millennia. The laryngeal nerve is a nerve that connects your voice box to your brain. Your voice box is only about 3 inches away from the base of your skull, but rather than go directly there, this nerve actually goes in the wrong direction, all the way down to your heart, under the aorta, and back up again to your brain, traveling roughly 2 feet to hit a target that's 3 inches away. All mammals have this nerve, and in a giraffe, it's over 12 feet long. The vagus nerve does the same thing and should go straight from your spinal cord to your diaphragm, but instead heads up from your lungs to the base of the skull. This is one of the reasons you get the hiccups, because this nerve is not intelligently designed. Many of the nerves in your body, in fact, take indirect routes to where they're trying to get to. But if you go back through our evolution, what you'll see is that the nerves start getting closer and closer, and the routes become far more direct. Look at our earliest amphibian ancestors, and you'll realize that all the nerves take direct routes. It's only after that amphibian starts to grow from a 4-legged animal to a 2-legged animal and walk upright that these nerves get dragged throughout the entire body to accommodate these changes as they're being made. We have tailbones. Whales have hip bones and a ball and socket joint. Again, if you understand the evolution of whales, you'll see both why they have these bones and why they've atrophied so much over time. Evolution has been used to successfully predict new species, explain mysteries we previously didn't understand, taught us how to combat disease, and even allowed us to create new organisms to fit specific needs. It's confirmed by multiple independent and unrelated fields of science, from embryology to archaeology to comparative anatomy, and been verified by independent scientists in every industrialized country in the world. Evolution had already been proven when, in 1953, we discovered DNA. What would the DNA show us? Would it disprove the theory or undermine it in some way? Well, once we sequenced the DNA, we found that the genetic material produced another tree of life. It's a second map produced completely independently in a completely unrelated field that reached all of the same conclusions. Only this one was far more detailed and allowed us to fill in many of the gaps that we hadn't understood before. Now, imagine please for a moment a rainbow. If I were to ask you how many colors are in that rainbow, you might say 7. But in reality, there's an infinite number of colors in a rainbow. For convenience, we say 7, but that rainbow actually contains every color imaginable. And while each color is different, each color also blends into the other colors. Red becomes orange, becomes yellow, becomes green, becomes blue, becomes indigo, becomes violet. If you look at the entire rainbow, red ultimately transitions to violet. And if I ask you to point to the place where red officially becomes orange, you can't do it. It's a progression. There's no one point where you can say that before this point it's red and after this point it's orange. Where does orange become yellow? Where does yellow become green? You can't do it. You can't point to a single discrete spot where these things happen. The same is true for evolution. Sure, we declare a species to start here or end there, but there's always wiggle room either way, and it's usually impossible to point to a definitive beginning or end of any particular species. No one generation is completely incompatible with its recent ancestors, but enough time passes and they drift further and further into a new species. All evolution is microevolution, just tiny changes which accrue over time, and when a sufficient number of these changes have occurred, we declare that we have witnessed macroevolution. But that's just a word. It's a convenient way of defining stages of the evolutionary process. If you believe in microevolution, that's the ballgame. Macroevolution is simply an arbitrary distinction we use for classification. To ask an evolutionist to point to the precise point where an ape became a man is a false argument. It's a straw man. There is no precise point. There never has been. Nobody ever argued there would be, and that's simply not how evolution works. These skulls here are a progression of human evolution, and while there is definitely significant change over time, and the first generation is completely incompatible with the last generation, there is no definitive point at which one can say a new species occurred. What's more, if you look at the tree of life, you'll see that there is never an instance where one kind of species has actually become another kind of species. That can't happen. It doesn't work that way. An ear of corn simply cannot turn into an elephant. No members of one branch of the tree can jump to another branch of the tree. Think about Abraham. Abraham and Sarah had many descendants. The children of these descendants will always be descendants of Abraham and Sarah. So will their children, and so on and so forth, no matter who they marry or what new branches are created on their family tree. Likewise, the descendants of Abraham and Hagar will also always be descendants of Abraham and Hagar. And while all of these ancestors share a common ancestry with Abraham, some are related to Hagar and others are related to Sarah. At no point can a descendant of Sarah give birth to a descendant of Hagar. It can't happen. The tree of life works the exact same way. Any descendants of corn will always be a kind of corn. You can get new species of corn and maybe get something that looks completely different, but it will always be a kind of corn. Anyone who says that an ear of corn can turn into a whale or a tomato doesn't understand how evolution works or is deliberately strawmanning it to make it look silly. This is us on the tree of life. No matter how much we evolve, no matter how much we change, no human being will ever produce an animal that is not a kind of human being. Beings came from apes. Therefore, we are also a kind of ape. Apes are a kind of primate, so we are primates too. All primates are a kind of mammal. This makes us a kind of mammal. All mammals are a kind of animal, so we are also a kind of animal, and our descendants will also be animals. And no matter how much we evolve or how much time you put into it, none of them will ever be a plant or a fish. And since all animals are eukaryotes, we are also eukaryotes. Evolution has been proven true time and time and time again. It's made predictions. It's explained holdovers like the tailbone, the laryngeal nerve, and hip bones in aquatic mammals like whales. And in fact, the vast majority of Christians believe it. Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, they all accept evolution as true and that it doesn't contradict the Bible, that in fact it's the means by which God works to make us the way we are today. Dr. Robert Carter in the Journal of Creation actually showed how mutations might not even be random, but instead pre-encoded by God into our DNA. There's no reason this has to contradict anyone's faith. The question is, does the evidence support it? The evidence for evolution is staggering across multiple independent and unrelated fields of research and concords with any new evidence we find. And with a near infinite number of defeaters that would destroy the theory, not one has been shown to work. Instead, with every new discovery, the tree of life becomes clearer, more precise, and better understood. And if you want to understand it, truly understand it, and learn for yourself whether or not it's true, don't talk to a creationist, don't talk to a physicist, talk to an expert, learn directly from the horse's mouth, and see why so many of your Christian brothers and sisters believe it and still love and hold their Bible dear. Thank you.
All right. I guess it's my turn. Well, thank you, Nick. I think we can fix all that. Not a problem. I'll go back word by word on some of that. Let me give you my introduction here, and then you can take it from there. The question to be debated tonight is the theory of evolution true? Well, we need to define a couple of words in all of this, like the word true. In accordance with fact or reality. Is it a fact, is it reality that all life forms came from a single cell creature? My contention is no, not at all, not true, okay? Now, the Merriam-Webster, being in accordance with the actual state of affairs is the definition of true. Comfortable, conformable to an essential reality, fully realized or fulfilled. Is it true? How about your dictionary? The definition of true is being loyal. That's a different kind of true. He's true blue or something. Something that is real, factually correct, accurate, or provable. Is it provable that humans and whales and amoebas have a common ancestor? I would say absolutely not. You're welcome to believe that. It's a faith. It's not. It cannot have the definition of true. Truth would be the opposite of lies. Pilate, like most politicians, did not know what truth was. What is truth? There probably aren't too many politicians even today that understand that one. But Philippians, we're told, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, to think on these things. So the topic of the debate tonight, as I understand it, is the theory of evolution true? Well, theory, a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something. Certainly, evolution is a theory. It's a supposition. It's a system of ideas that intends to explain why we have such a great diversity of life on Earth, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained, like Darwin's theory of evolution, hypothesis, thesis, conjecture, supposition, etc. Okay. The textbooks teach evolution as if it is true, and you don't even think about questioning it. They start with that assumption. That's like me asking students to explain, why are elephants orange? That's a false assumption to start with. They're not orange, okay? Evolution is the process of change in all life forms over generations. This is pretty much what you said, Nick. And evolutionary biology is the study of how evolution occurs. Biological populations evolve through genetic changes that correspond to changes in the organism's observable traits. Just what you said. Darwinism is the theory of biological evolution developed by the English naturalist Charles Darwin. How he got to be called a naturalist, I don't know. He was a theologian. You should ask a real scientist, not Charles Darwin, who was a theologian by your definition there, Nick. What is the main theory of evolution? Natural selection. The theory of evolution by natural selection, first formulated in Darwin's book On the Origin of Species, that's not the whole title, by the way, in 1859, is the process by which organisms change over time as a result of changes in heritable physical or behavioral traits. From Quora.com, downloaded about an hour ago, they show that four-legged creatures slowly evolve into the whale. And you would say, I'm sure, Nick, that some of the evidence for this is the whale still retains hip bones. You're sadly mistaken on that. Those are not hip bones, but we'll get into that later on. My video number 4, I covered that in great detail, lies in the textbooks, okay? The 4 basic premises of Darwin's theory. The world's animal and plant communities are dynamic, not static. I think I would agree with that, only I think there are limits to how dynamic they can be. They change over time with new forms originating and others becoming extinct. I agree with that depending on what you mean by new forms, okay? Bigger dogs, littler dogs, but it's still always going to be a dog. Number 2, the evolutionary process is gradual and continuous. New species arise through slow and steady environmental changes. I defy anybody, well, we better define the word species here, but I would use the word kind. Nobody's ever seen any new kind arise slowly or quickly. This is dreaming. This is fairy tale stuff. This is not science. This is not true. Number 3, all organisms descended from an original and common ancestor. Really? All organisms. So the whale and the mosquito have a common ancestor. This is what the theory teaches. Is it true that a whale and a mosquito have a common ancestor? Over time, the process of natural selection has created different species, each specifically adapted to its ecological niche. Number 4 here. Natural selection not only causes changes within populations during changing environmental conditions, but also acts to maintain the status quo under relatively constant environmental conditions. Probably could agree with that. Textbooks like Encyclopedia Britannica would show that all life forms slowly evolved from, billions of years ago, came up to what we have today. University California in Berkeley shows that the humans and the whales have a common ancestor with the dinosaurs and the frogs and the tuna and the sharks, if you go back far enough. This is what the theory teaches. Is this true? Is it true that chimpanzees and perch have a common ancestor? That's your job to prove that. Is it true that humans and insects have a common ancestor? These are the kind of things kids face in school every day. Evolution, all in the family. The fish is my 118 millionth cousin, my 280,000th cousin to the chimpanzee. The frog is talking here, I'm sure. My 21 millionth cousin. Well, you can believe all that if you want, but is it true? Here's a family tree showing humans and whales and horses and cows, all related to tuna and snails and squid and ferns and all the plants and all the amoebas, everything back to a common ancestor. It's very easy, Nick, to draw lines on paper and claim that that is evidence or that that is somehow supported by evidence, but I just simply don't buy that. Is it true that humans and zebras have a common ancestor? Is it true that humans and pine trees have a common ancestor? This drawing says it does. It says they are. They draw lines on paper as if it is true. I think it's your obligation, if you want me to be forced to pay for your religion to be taught in all the schools, it's your job to prove it. Okay, you say it's true. Common descent describes how, in evolutionary biology, a group of organisms shares a more recent common ancestor. There is massive evidence of common descent of all life on Earth from the last universal common ancestor. And they have the last universal common ancestor as an amoeba, slowly becoming all the humans and the plants and everything else. You can download tree of life and just Google it, and there are probably tens of millions of responses to that showing all these trees of life. Is it true? Sorry. Textbooks certainly present it like it's true and try to give evidence for it, like this one, evidence of evolution from fossils, something that you mentioned, Nick. I've pointed out hundreds of times, no fossil could possibly count as evidence for evolution. When you find a fossil in the ground, all you know is it died. All you can prove is it died. You cannot prove it had any children. You certainly cannot prove it had children that were different than itself. No animal today produces children that are different than themselves. Why would we think the ones that are found as fossils could do it? Evidence from structure. This is your argument from the whale's pelvis, supposedly. Is there structure that indicates evolution? Is there evidence from molecular biology? Or how do you tell the age of fossils? Is there evidence from development? This is the argument from the embryos, proven wrong in 1874, still being taught. And then they talk about natural selection. Mutation, migration, genetic drift, and natural selection are mechanisms of change. The importance of genetic variation, the random nature of genetic drift, and the effects of a reduction in genetic variation. How variation, differential reproduction, and heredity result in evolution by natural selection. It goes on, the article does. In other words, this is supposedly how it's supposed to work. Natural selection selects the best one. What are the four mechanisms of evolution? Allele frequencies in a population may change due to four fundamental forces of evolution: natural selection, genetic drift, mutations, gene flow. The four fundamental forces of evolution. Well, natural selection can only select. If I said, I want you to go to the screwdriver drawer where all of our screwdrivers are and select all the hammers. There aren't any hammers to select from in the screwdriver drawer, okay? So you can't select hammers out of the screwdriver drawer. Natural selection can only select what's already available in the genetic code. It is not in the genetic code of worms to have wings and fly. So how are we going to get a worm to develop into a bird through natural selection? Because birds have wings and worms don't. What about genetic drift? Can the gene code drift off enough to turn a worm into a bird or make it fly? I would say no, that's not true. Could a mutation cause that? If a worm was mutating slowly toward becoming a bird, it would take trillions of mutations, first of all, and each one would have to have the opposite sex mutate at the same time in the same area. And all observed mutations are harmful, fatal, or neutral. They do nothing. I would defy anybody, including you, Nick, to show me a real beneficial mutation that added genetic material. And if it did indeed if you had a beneficial mutation that added new genetic material, all the rest of them have to die or this doesn't work because they're going to get blended back into the population. This is Adolf Hitler 101. We find the superior race and eliminate the inferiors. It's actually best if the inferiors die for the evolution theory. Gene flow, sure, genes flow. You have genes from your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. They've been flowing for generations, and you're still human, and so were they, as far back as you want to go. I find it very interesting that atheists argue against design using arguments that they designed. Like you designed your PowerPoint presentation to teach how things happen by chance. Think about that, Nick, for a few minutes, okay? If a protozoa, this textbook says, turns into the biology teacher, if it happened quickly, we would all know it's a fairy tale. You know, you kiss a frog, it turns to a prince.
Are you keeping track of time?
Are
you keeping track of time?
Sort of, you know.
Okay, I forgot, sorry.
Okay, sort of keeping track of time. Just a few more minutes here. If we say a frog turns to a prince quickly, that's obviously a fairy tale. But somehow, if the protozoa turns to a biology teacher slowly, that's modern science. I think that's ridiculous. Satan is a liar. The Bible says one day the great dragon will be cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan. He deceiveth the whole world. I think many, millions of people, including you, Nick, have been deceived by this silly idea that we all evolved from a common ancestor. Jesus said to the crowd, ye are of your father the devil. There's no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own. He's a liar and the father of it. All the lies come from the devil, according to the Bible. And I think it's a lie to teach kids that you are related to a worm and an amoeba, which came from a rock, which came from nothing that exploded. I think that's a lie. The Bible says in the last days there will be scoffers walking after their own lusts and say, where is the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. This is exactly what you're teaching, Nick. The way things are happening now is the way they've always been happening. Slow, gradual changes. It was predicted 2,000 years ago that people in the last days would come and teach this. This is not true. For this, they willingly are ignorant of. They are deliberately stupid about three things. By the word of God, the heavens were of old. God, by his word, he spoke everything into existence. And the earth standing out of the water and in the water. I covered that in my video number 2. And the second thing they're ignorant of is the flood. There was a worldwide flood that deposited nearly all the fossils we find in the whole planet. All done in 1 year. Third thing they're ignorant of is the coming judgment. There's a judgment coming. And Nick, I'm worried for you. If your position that you hold to now is what you always hold to, I think you're going to be in trouble when you stand before the Creator, who not only created you, but wrote a book and told you how he did it. So is the theory of evolution true? My contention is absolutely no. Not true. If I find an arrowhead on the ground, I know automatically somebody designed this. I may not know who, I may not know where, but I know somebody designed it. They say there's evidence for evolution. There are different kinds of evidence. We don't have time, I'll stop right there. We can go into all the various different types of evidence. I would like to see some real scientific evidence for evolution. I would hold that there is none. Nobody has ever seen, nobody's been ever able to make any animal or plant into a totally new kind of plant or animal. They can't even make it happen, let alone see it happen. So, Nick, I'd like to know what your thoughts are. If I have time, I have a list of things that you said that I'd like to. You said no animal has ever become another kind of animal. How can you possibly say that, Nick? You believe they did. You believe the amoeba became a whale. That's a different kind of animal. You believe the amoeba became a mosquito. You believe this early ancestor became everything. How can you possibly say with a straight face that you believe no animal has ever become another kind of animal?
Well, I mentioned.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. How can you say that? Go ahead.
Time to unmute himself.
Yeah, you have to unmute, Nick.
Thank you about that. I would I'd kind of like to go in order, but I think that's a good question. I do have a quick question. You said we're in the end times. Just out of curiosity, about when did that start? If that's something that can be known, I'm just curious.
When did the end times start?
When did we sort of start? If there's a general, I mean, did it start 100 years ago, 16 years? I'm just curious. I don't know.
I don't know. Peter said it 2,000 years ago that in the end times it would happen. It started happening in the last couple hundred years where they started denying the creation, the flood, and the coming judgment. So I suppose maybe about the time of Darwin. Pick a date and say mid-1800s it started.
All right. Oh, thank you. All right. So to answer, and then I would like to try to get in order, but to answer that question, because I think that's a very important one. I do think there's something called affirming the consequent, which is a logical fallacy, and I think it gets made a lot in this regard. It absolutely, evolution, and this is again why I would like to have people talk to evolutionary biologists to understand the distinction, because this is, at no time does one species turn into another one. We all inherit our older species. Now, for example, let's assume for a second, and I want to try to use some of the biblical examples. Let's assume that I am of the Abrahamic line, if you go back far enough. Now, I would still be part of the line of, let's say, Abraham and Sarah. Now, my parents were suitors. So I have also become a suitor. And if I marry into another family, they may change and also add to that family and add to that family. And you have that tree right up there right now. People may not be able to see it, but if you look at the trees, and this is something I tried to explain in my opening, something's always, you have this so-called change is really just a refinement into something else. So a worm cannot become a bird. It's already past that stage. A bird is somewhere completely different on that tree, just in the same way that a descendant of Abraham and Hagar could not be born into the Abraham and Sarah line. It cannot be done. They've already passed that stage. They can create new families, but they've already passed that stage in the family tree. Same thing here. So everything started from very simple single-celled organisms that branched out, that huge level of diversity, and then created new life, and everything's descended from those lines. So if you start with the eukaryotes, everything that came from a eukaryote is still a eukaryote, but eukaryotes branched out and created mammals, and animals, various different kinds of animals, so on and so forth. But once you're a worm, you can still be refined as a worm, but you're always going to stay a worm. A worm will never become a bird. That's going backwards on the evolution. That ship's already sailed. That's not going to happen. So I think it's a misunderstanding of evolution to think that one species will become another. We have inherited all of our ancestor species, and then there are cousins and so on and so forth, as you pointed out, which I would agree with. Now, you were asking for evidence of evolution, and I do think that the sort of holdovers are one example. There's the evolution, because it's a theory, and I would define true as something can be said to be true if it is in accordance with measurable reality. And that's the way I think science normally looks at it. Now, the theory of evolution has a great many different independent fields that contribute to it. But I would like to, at a minimum, and you mentioned bones, you mentioned archaeology, all sorts of things that I think are absolutely worth talking about. But I'd like to start with, just so we do these in order, the sort of holdovers in our own anatomy. Or in anatomy of other species, that you sit there and you say, okay, so why do whales have hip bones and a ball and socket joint? Now, if they were just designed that way, it would seem, I mean, in most cases, these don't seem to serve any purpose. But if you understand where the whale came from, and if you watch in the sedimentary layer as those bones get smaller and smaller and smaller, and in some cases fuse, you can watch the atrophy. The atrophy is much less in the larger whales, but it still happens. And this is a good example of a holdover from when they were, in fact, four-legged animals. And I think I had something else I was going to say, but I lost my train of thought, so I'll let you respond to that.
All right. Well, that's a good one to start on. I'm trying to find the particular slides. I show pictures. I had an actual whale hip bone, as you're talking about, in the museum. It's now still in Pensacola, Florida, but this is a very common, I think every debate I've been in where they talk about, evidence for evolution, they bring up this one about the whale having hip bones. This is simply not true. I'll show you here if I can find it. Those bones, if you study whale anatomy, those bones are part of the whale's reproductive system. They cannot make baby whales without those special bones and special muscles to control their reproductive organs. They have to mate underwater in the dark with no hands, and they can't talk and say, scoot over, honey. So this is absolutely silly to believe that the whale has a vestigial pelvis or anything else, and then not a ball and socket. If there's a bone with muscles attached to it that's able to maneuver around for the obvious function of making more baby whales, I think that's evidence of design. I think the whales probably appreciated being able to do that. So, it's just simply not true. Plus, even then, even if it were true, though, Nick, that would be an example of losing something, not gaining something. So you're saying it had legs and it lost them to become a whale. Would you please, first of all, that example is not true, but show me an example where something has gained something. Because to go from a worm to anything non-worm, and they do show the amoebas, the protista, as the ancestor of all life forms. That's what the chart shows. So where is the evidence of any animal or plant gaining some new information, some new feature, some new structure? The hip bone would be the exact opposite of what you need as evidence. So give me your best one you know of for gaining something, please.
All right. So to handle those in order, because I think that's a very fair question. By the way, to refute one thing you said, my wife is utterly convinced that I came from a head of cabbage. So at a minimum there, I would think she would agree that it's been proven. But that's a whole nother point.
Okay.
Now, So you're right. I would have to demonstrate, or evolution would have to demonstrate something added. So let's discuss that in a second. But this is an example of why I think it is important to talk to. So I had mentioned earlier, there are a lot of passages in the Bible that you would not understand if you didn't speak to someone who was well versed in the Bible, and that would come across as very different than intended if, and I've got a couple of those, I don't have them handy, but I can get them in a minute. But ones where you really need to talk to a minister. And I have atheist friends who sit there and say, oh my God, Nick, did you see this in the Bible where Moses says that you should go out and rape women? And I'm sitting there going, look, the Bible's been around for 2,000 years. If you think you found a defeater to it just by browsing through, maybe you should take a step back and talk to someone who at least believes it. Don't talk to an atheist. Talk to someone who believes it. Now, with the biology of the whale, I believe what you're referring to when you talk about the muscles in the reproductive system, there is actually only one study that I'm aware of that refers to that. It is this study right here, Sexual Selection Targets Cetacean Pelvic Bones. And this is the study. Now, there are a couple of interesting things about this study. First of all, one of the things that this study notices is that there are females that have those same bones. So it's not just the males. And it is true that it is used to anchor the male reproductive system, but only in the larger whales, which is something that I mentioned earlier. Only in the larger whales. In the smaller species, those muscles don't exist. Also, those muscles are tied to the pelvic bone and not to the ball and socket joint, which in fact does exist. And what I will show you here is, this is a picture of that ball and socket joint. And I actually had this picture in my presentation. And first of all, below you will find a code. That is what museum it is stored in. That one was in the presentation, as was a couple of other ones. These are all actually female bones. And that study, which does find what you were saying about the male reproductive system, actually says that proves evolution for a number of reasons. First of all, again, what it has done is it has slowed the atrophy of those bones in the males that have it. Again, only a select number of species. The females also have those bones, and it's not just whales, it is actually porpoises, it is dolphins, male, female, all alike. And if you speak to any biologist anywhere in the world, they will tell you that the females have those bones. Now, one of the things I did was, in case this came up, I did speak to a biologist. His name is David Taylor, and he actually does necropsies on whales, including the females, and he has seen those muscles, and he's seen whales without those muscles. He is actually able to identify, in many species, the difference between a male hip bone and the female hip bone, and again, the ball and socket joint, which according to that study is not tied to this system and is still part of one of those evolutionary holdovers. David Taylor works at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and he has on his website, which I will make available, actual necropsies on the females where you can see the mammary gland and you can see those bones that do not serve any purpose, and he has actually pulled them out. And he has actually been gracious enough to invite you and I both to an autopsy of a female whale if we would like to see those bones and confirm that they are in the female and that they are not part of the reproductive system. So my hope is that addresses, and again, all you have to do is ask any biologist and they will tell you that yes, that study did find that in some males it serves that purpose, but it's only the larger species. That does not address a couple of other issues that you had, which I would like to address, but I don't want to talk forever, so I'd like to give you a chance to respond if...
Yeah, Steve, put me on. Okay. I have, in our museum, we have replicas, castings of those bones. And you are correct, the male and female are different. The male, as you may know, nobody's ever seen whales meeting because they don't do it so deep in the ocean. It's a big mystery, but they mount the female from behind. She's got a huge tail in the way. She has to maneuver her reproductive organs also. And I would defy this guy at Woods Hole or any place else to prove that they don't use them. Why would they have them if they don't use them? Why would the body keep reproducing something over and over? Why would it be in the genetic code to make a bone they don't use?
It wouldn't. I think that's kind of the point.
Well, and I think you'll find that, as you mentioned, whales the textbooks say whales have them. They say they have hind limb bones that have no function. This is what kids are being taught. This is just a lie. With this book in my library here, just imagine whales walking around These are the bones they're talking about from the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History, right there. And the different types of whales have different shaped bones, okay, depending upon the type of whale it is. These are the ones found in a killer whale, as opposed to, what was this one? I don't remember what this particular whale was in the museum hanging from the ceiling there. But the bones have different shapes because the whales are different. We have different shaped skulls on people, too. There's the one that I have the casting of here from a pilot whale. National Pornographic shows the leftover whale on a dolphin, so the leftover bones on a dolphin skeleton. The whale's pelvis. Here's one of the actual bones we have down in Pensacola. It has blood supply, it has nerve supply. It's not useless, it's being used. The male and female reproductive systems are very different. The male's reproductive organ is 15 feet long. He's got to maneuver this underwater in the dark with no arms without being able to talk and hit the target and make baby whales. So this is, I think, somebody has no understanding of biology if they think those bones serve no function. They certainly do. But again, you're missing the entire point that this example you're giving is an example of losing, not gaining. All the textbooks teach it because that's the best one they've got. I say, guys, this is the opposite of what you need. You need trillions of examples of something gaining a new feature, a new structure, new information. To go from an amoeba to a whale, you'd have to gain a whole lot of stuff. Where is the evidence of any creature gaining something? Go ahead.
All right. Well, actually, I'll get to Dr. Carter in a second on gains because he's an interesting one. But so let's start with a couple examples of gains because I do think that is a fair point. Actually, just to quickly. So I have seen that image also does exist in this study. So that is precisely from this study. And once again, they confirm what you said, but only in the larger ones. And the study says that this study reaffirms evolution and says that their findings, and they explain why, and I will make the study available on my website, but it explicitly states that reproductive system does not exist in the smaller whales or dolphins. As to gaining new functions, there's a lot of times when that's actually been done. One of the interesting ones, and I had said this in my opening before too, it's difficult to find those in mammals and larger animals because of the life cycle. It's smaller to find. It's easier to find it in smaller ones. One of the interesting ones is goat's beard, which was introduced into the United States. It is a kind of wildflower, and it was introduced into the United States from Europe shortly after the turn of the century. Within a few decades, their population expanded, and they began to encounter one another in the American West. Whenever mixed populations occurred, the species interbred, producing a sterile hybrid offspring. Then in the late 40s, two new species of goat's beard appeared near Pullman, Washington. Although the new species were similar in appearance to the hybrids, they produced fertile offspring. The evolutionary process had created a separate species that could reproduce but not mate with the goat's beard plant from which it had evolved. That is one example of new information having been gained. And let's see, Dr. Robert Carter, who is in fact actually a creationist, and he wrote in this article in what is that? That is the Journal of Creation, and it said, "Can mutations create new information?" Now, Dr. Carter says many creationists claim that mutations are not able to produce new information. Yet in a packed genome operating in at least 4 dimensions and packed with meta-information, potential changes are strongly prescribed. Can mutations produce new information? Yes. The phrase that mutations cannot produce new information is almost a mantra among some creationists, yet I do not agree. Now, what he argues is that God actually encoded all of these mutations into us, but they are, in fact, new, being released at some time. But I found that argument a rather interesting one. And one of the ways in which we add new information is polyplodity. I'm sorry, I probably pronounced that incorrectly, where, in fact, many species end up either doubling or in some ways adding to the number of genes that they have. This is how we went from single cell to larger structures. It has been observed, and it is a good example of new information being added and how smaller organisms with a smaller amount of DNA can become much larger ones. But I would start with the goat's beard, if that answers your question.
The goat's beard is a plant. It was brought in and took over in there, like we have kudzu down here, a nuisance, for most of the people in the South. And you're saying the goat's beard was able to, as it traveled west, was able to meet a new plant and produce offspring that were almost always sterile, similar to the mules that we get from horses and donkeys crossbreeding. But now all of a sudden you found one that became fertile, and it was not able to produce back with the original parent stock. It is still a plant. It would take trillions and trillions and trillions of examples like this to change from a worm to a whale or a mosquito. Now, I'd like to clarify, this article from National Geographic back in 2005, millions of years ago, dolphins, you said dolphins don't have these, dolphins had legs. If you look closely at a dolphin skeleton below, you'll see two small rod-shaped pelvic bones. These bones may be leftover hind legs that some scientists think mean the dolphin's ancestors walked around on land. They say dolphins' ancestors look like wolves, but were more closely related to modern-day cows. So the dolphins do have it. I cannot verify if all types of whales had it, but I showed the pilot whale has these bones, the humpback whale has them, the killer whale has them.
If I can interrupt just for one, I apologize for interrupting. What I meant was doesn't have that muscle structure. They have the bones, and I believe I had said, unless I misspoke, I believe I had said that dolphins, porpoises, and whales all have the bones, but the muscle structure for reproduction exists only in large whales. So the dolphins do not have that muscle structure.
I would question that, and I'll have to have that proven to me. Why would they have these bones for no function? That would be an irritant, not a blessing. And I suspect a person who's with dolphin anatomy knowledge is high would say, oh, yes, they do have muscles, and they use them as frequently as they can, as she will let them. Oh, so that's I would have to have that proven to me.
That's why the doctor from the Oceanographic Institute he's ready. He's ready to have that discussion, and I think I gave it, but we could.
You mentioned polyploidy. That is simply a doubling of the exact same chromosomes. This is not new information. It's a doubling of existing information. If I give you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or if I give you 50 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you still have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Polyploidy, like the giant strawberries you see now in the store that taste terrible, that is polyploidy. It's a doubling of the chromosomes. It's not any new information. It's if you think of the chromosomes as a book with all the letters of the alphabet arranged in a particular order to make sentences that make sense in English. What if I give you a book and say, oh no, I'm going to give you two identical books? It's the same thing, repeated. The DNA code is similar to the letters of the alphabet, able to write, with our 26 letters, you can arrange them in certain orders and make millions of words and an infinite number of sentences. But you're never going to turn it into Chinese with our 26 letters of the alphabet, or Hindi, or any other language. So I think that polyploidy is not an example of gaining information. It's a doubling of existing information. And I'd have to see, again, the whales or the dolphins or whatever is losing information. So if that's the best you've got of gaining the wildflower that can now no longer interbreed with its parents, I don't know why. Maybe I'll study that one, the goat's beard. Thank you. Appreciate that. But it's still a flower. It's still a plant. This is not gaining new information. If the mules, 1 out of 20,000 mules is fertile. Generally, horse and a jackass breed and get a mule which is sterile. 19,999 of them are sterile, but there have been cases where they've been able to breed. But they always produce an animal that looks like a horse. 4-wheel drive, leather upholstery, single hoof. This is not evidence that a worm could turn into a whale. I think you're desperate to believe that theory, and I don't know why, Nick, when you want to believe such a thing, but I mean, you're welcome to believe what you want, but that you haven't given any evidence of any animal gaining anything that's really new information. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. I think once again to reiterate, and I'm glad we established this at the beginning, but we seem to be losing ground on this one. The one claim that flower will always, all its descendants will always be flowers. All the descendants of any worm will always be worms. They will always, any descendant of a human being will always be a human being, no matter how much evolution there is. And if there's miscommunication on that point, that is one of the most basic fundamental concepts that exists in evolution. And if that's one that's not understood, I think there's a problem. Nobody claims it will ever become a different kind. So I am not suggesting that that flower is going to become anything other than a flower. Now, there is another interesting one. So, and the polyploidy, what happens is when you double that, you are correct to the best of my understanding, which is that it is a duplicate of what exists, but that doubles the chance of a mutation happening and that mutation producing something. In many cases, the mutation is negative and it gets selected out. In some cases, it's positive. Now, this is an article from New Scientist magazine by Bob Holmes, and this was a discovery of something very interesting. Bacteria make a major evolutionary shift in the lab. Now, the way we knew to look for this is because we understand how evolution works. And what happened here, this is absolutely a gaining of new information. A major evolutionary innovation has unfurled right in front of researchers' eyes. It is the first time evolution has ever been caught in the act of making such a rare and complex new trait. They took E. coli, and around the 31,000th generation, something dramatic happened. The bacteria suddenly acquired the ability to metabolize citrate, a second nutrient in their culture that E. coli normally cannot use. Now, I'm going to suggest two things. First of all, this is absolutely the acquiring of a new trait. But second of all, it actually still is E. coli. It's just and they had to name it as a subset of E. coli. It is just the next evolved. It hasn't turned into a new species and never will. But it has acquired this new trait, and this is the let's see, an evolutionary biologist, Jerry Coyne, said the thing I like most about this is that let's see, anti-evolutionists say you cannot get these complex traits by a combination of unlikely events. He says this is exactly what has happened here, and creationists say cannot happen. This is absolutely an example of very simple E. coli bacteria that has never been able to metabolize this, learning to metabolize this nutrient.
Okay. Well, you said something interesting. You said, I got your quote right, I was trying to, descendants of worms will always be worms. So descendants of Protista will always be Protista. Why do they show the descendants of the Protista to be everything? Here they have, we're teaching the kids, the descendants of Protista are humans. But you said the descendants of worms will always be worms. They can't get outside of their clade, whatever a clade is. So how did the Protista get outside? How did the Protista produce something that's no longer a Protista? Apparently it did, according to the charts. I mean, there's thousands of millions of these charts on the internet. I got 200 textbooks over here that all have these charts in them. So I think it's an inconsistent position, Nick. You're saying they will always stay in, you're always going to be in the Abraham's family or something like that. And I would agree. Yeah. And I would say Protista have always produced Protista. Why do we make the kids learn a chart that says Protista became humans and zebras and dinosaurs and sharks?
Well, if you can leave that up for a second, I think that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about because, and this is why in the opening I discussed this. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? I don't want to.
Go ahead.
The reason we use a family tree exactly like this is so that you can go back to lineage and figure out what is still a kind of what. So human beings are still a kind of ape. We will never not be a kind of ape. Everything that we give birth to will be a kind of ape and a kind of human being. Everything that ape was a kind of mammal, so we are a kind of mammal. So if you look at that tree, you can add up. We are a kind of all of the things on that tree. I do think there's one or two errors on that tree. We are not descended from fish, and I have actually seen that one, and that one has an error just because it's too compact. But at any rate, we are a kind of eukaryote. It all started with eukaryotes. Oh, there you go, the first cells. That works perfectly. So human beings are a kind of mammal, are a kind of animal, or a kind of eukaryote, and so on and so forth. And the reason that tree is so useful is in the exact same way that you can add up all the descendants of a family, you can add up everybody on the family tree. But we are absolutely a kind of mammal. And I think there isn't everybody knows that we're a mammal, and I don't think any biologist has ever said we are not. We did not change kinds. Our descendants did not change kinds. They added kinds in the same way that people can get married and add new members to their family. Now, I think there was something else you had said that I haven't addressed, but I probably spaced it. We were talking E. coli. Okay, so those kinds of changes, you're always still going to, and if we evolve into something else, our ancestors will still be humans and that's something else.
Okay,
so yes.
Is a protozoa a mammal? Does it have mammary glands?
No, and if you look, that's why it is not on that part in the tree.
So a single-celled protozoa, which is, are we single-celled? The protozoa is not a mammal. The protozoa did become something else somewhere along the line. This is what the kids are being taught. This is my objection. I don't care if you guys want to believe all this stuff. It doesn't bother me. But you want to force everybody to pay for this silliness to be taught to all the kids. And it's not, which is the purpose of this debate. It is not true. It cannot be observed or tested or demonstrated that a protozoa has ever produced anything besides a protozoa. And you said, well, of course, they always will. Well, apparently they didn't in the past. How come from here on in the future it can't happen, but in the past you believe it did happen? This is not science, Nick. This is fairy tale, SpongeBob imagination stuff. It happened long ago and far away. Well, make it happen today. Get a bunch of protozoa and make it happen again. I want to see it this time.
All right, two quick responses to that. First of all, again, if you can read that tree properly, I think what you will find is that, again, the claim isn't that these have become something new, but that they have added to what they are and refined into something different, but maintain everything that they were previously. If you would like an example of that, I do have this. Scientists have witnessed, and this happened February 20th, 2019. This is brand new. This is probably the single, this is utterly staggering. Scientists have witnessed a single-celled algae evolve into a multicellular organism. The evolution took just 50 weeks. It was triggered by the introduction of a single predator. The way they knew to introduce that predator and that would be effective in this was because they understood evolution, and it did exactly what it was predicted to do. The team captured 9 14-second time-lapse videos of the transition where a single-cell organism did the single most incredible evolutionary thing it can. It became a multi-celled organism. That's the ball game. That's evolution. That is absolutely the adding of new material. Incredibly, they watched as it took, okay, here we show that de novo origins of simple multicellularity can evolve in response to predation. Excuse me, I'm dyslexic as all get out. Not only that, but the resulting multicellular organisms were all incredibly varied, just as you'd expect in natural selection. The research is published in scientific reports. The paper is freely available. This is actually the paper on it. But that's the ball game. That's the hardest part in evolution, is going from a single-celled organism to a multi-celled organism. That covers all your requirements of having new information. And again, it is still as an ancestor, just as all of Jesus was an ancestor of Abraham, but not all ancestors of Abraham are actually ancestors of Jesus, because there are those in between. You still have the tree of life that functions that way, but what you have here is the single biggest evolutionary step that can be made. It was reproduced February 20th, 2019, and I believe that hits all the criteria you have listed thus far.
Okay, well, a couple of obvious questions. If now for the first time they've seen this in 2019, why have we been teaching this for 150 years with no evidence? If there was no evidence until February 20th of 2019, why were we teaching it for the last 150 years? Because it wasn't science. I don't think it's science now. I think what they've actually observed is colonization. A group of them decided to work together. If a group of people decide to work together to repel a common enemy, they build a fort and everybody get in the fort, and one guy says, I'll take care of the cannon. Somebody else says, I'll take care of the sniper rifle or whatever. That's colonization for predation, which is what you're talking about. I will read the report and I'll do a critique on it if you'd like. But I think you need to stop and think. If they just now, this year, February 2019, found the best evidence ever for evolution, you got a problem. Because you've been teaching this for 150 years with no evidence, which is what I've been saying. And I don't think this is evidence either. I think this will get disproven. But I think you just shot yourself in the foot, Nick.
Well, I think my wife would agree with you that I frequently am either shooting myself in the foot or putting the foot in the mouth. But having said that, as to evidence, this actually appears to be a bit of a straw man, and here's why. You seem to be suggesting that there are two states. It's either proven or there is no evidence whatsoever. We have had staggering evidence for evolution. I've covered some of it in this already, but just staggering amounts of evidence for evolution. What's interesting about this is one of the missing pieces. And I talked about missing pieces before, and there's missing pieces in everything. There's missing pieces in the Bible, and every now and then somebody finds something new about the Bible. We find the Dead Sea Scrolls. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, nobody said, oh my God, there was no evidence for the Bible and now it's proven. It's not a binary state that way. And it appears to me that you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, so now you found this huge proof, and until then there was no evidence. One of the ways they found this proof is they knew what they were doing. They knew how to look for it, and they knew how to create it. And it was specifically the introduction of a predator. And I would like to point out that this is actually not colonization. They make very clear here that it is a single-celled organism that becomes multicellular, and you can see the pictures of it, and you can see how it does this, but it is its own organism. You cannot separate those cells without killing it. And again, when I say that that's the ball game, in my mind, that seems to cover every objection that... Now, I will grant one thing. This does not prove common ancestor. Doesn't do it. I think that's already been demonstrated and proven. That doesn't do it. It does prove one thing. Evolution, the way it's been described, is absolutely possible. We have now seen it, and we have reproduced it, and we did so deliberately. We said, we're going to try to reproduce it, and in 50,000 iterations of E. coli, we succeeded. So the fact that science was able to make these predictions and we were able to produce it suggests to me that we know exactly what we're doing. But at any rate, it takes off the table that this can't be true, and at a minimum puts on, we now know we can evolve. So the question is, we've got all this evidence that we did evolve. We were able to use that evidence to make this prediction and actually evolve a species ourselves in real time. It seems to me to be very difficult to say that this isn't true.
Okay, question. Did they give this new creature a name? Does this have the name of the thing? I'll look it up.
I think they did. It was an E. coli something. No, the E. coli was the one that gained the new. That was one shift. I don't know what the name of this thing is. It's probably on here somewhere, and I've got the full paper. Like I said, the paper is, and I can get you the name of the paper. It's Matthew Heron, Joshua Browen, Johnny. The other thing I can do is put it up onto a freeze frame. Or I can put it up here so people can freeze frame it. I got most of it here. I'm not going to waste everyone's time by looking at it, but anyone can freeze frame it there. And like I said, I'll put a copy up. They've made this publicly available to any. Okay, yeah, it's Chloriella vulgaris. I have no idea. You're going to make me read Latin, aren't you? You are. Oh my God! Yeah, I told you I'm dyslexic, and you said, Nick, read the Latin for me.
Yeah, Latin's a dead language. It killed the Romans, and now it's killing us.
It's killing me.
I have a question, though, Nick. Is this multicellular creature able to reproduce with another multicellular creature, or do they always have to start from scratch with single cells getting together? If so, that would seem more like a colony. If it's actually a new creature, it should be able to reproduce with another one similar to it. I think they're grossly over-exaggerating out of desperation. I doubt that this thing's able to take in food and give off waste. The functions of an organism have been well defined in biology for centuries. Be able to grow, reproduce, take in and digest their food, whatever that is, and give off a waste product. Does this thing actually meet the criteria, or is this just some scientist who's desperate to prove his theory so that he can justify rejecting the scriptures? Is my take on it. So see if you can find out, was this thing capable of reproducing with another one similar to it, or did it have to start from scratch every time to build a new one?
No, it can, and in fact they've had numerous iterations and life cycles of it, and the new one can reproduce. Now the other thing, and to get back to go against scripture, you have to keep in mind a great many of people who have believed in evolution have also, first of all, believed in Scripture. Catholics, it's the official position of the Catholic Church that evolution and the Big Bang are correct. That if that's the official position of the Catholic Church, I don't think they've got anything against Scripture. And Darwin had nothing against Scripture. That was not the answer he wanted. This was directly, he despised this. It caused a major a crisis of faith. I don't think, first of all, that they're necessarily in conflict, but I don't think that anyone in science is out to destroy anything. But this is a fully functioning, and they have to, I forget what they used to keep it alive, but they grew it in a petri dish. It had the full nutrients. It strains within each life cycle. Let's see. Well, if you really want me to find it, I could probably, I think it's going to take some time, but it is a full functioning organism. And in fact, also the other thing, just in case people are interested, and this is in the paper, but you can actually see how it becomes a multi-celled organism. And it is an organism by the scientific definition. So again, in my mind, that absolutely does not prove common ancestry. Doesn't do that. I think that's proved by other means. But what this does prove is that evolution is absolutely a viable theory, and when you combine it with everything else, I think it's pretty well understood what evolution says and means.
Well, they had to keep it alive. That's interesting. If this happened in nature, you get a totally new group of cells get together and form an organism. Now you have a host of other problems with fitting into it a whole ecology. It has to have not only someone to mate with of the opposite sex somehow, and how do you tell with a group of cells? I don't know. But we don't want to go down that road. It has to have a whole ecology, an environment to live in. Would it be simply eaten by something else that's already there? Say, oh no, new food, let's eat this thing, and they're gone. To claim that this could happen trillions and trillions of times over billions of years, to change from an amoeba or a protista to a biology teacher is, I think, a great leap of faith. The official position of the Catholic Church, I could care less with the Catholic. I'll debate the Pope any day of the week on several topics. How do you get saved? Got to pay them money to go to heaven? There's two kinds of religions, Cain and Abel. Cain thought, I can please God with my works. Here, God, here's my fruit, my vegetables. Look what I did for you. Didn't work for Cain. Read Genesis 4. Abel brought an innocent sacrifice. The Catholics are just another branch of the Cain religion, trying very hard to please God by their works. They make great neighbors. If they're really honest, true Catholics, they won't steal from you. That's great, but that's not going to get them into heaven. So I think that I don't care what they believe. I'll debate the Pope on evolution. Give him a call. Tell him, Ken Hovind, Lenox, Alabama. Come on down. I'll give him a tour on the Kawasaki Mule. Instead of the Pope Mobile, put glass over the top of it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, but I will point out, so the Catholic Encyclopedia lists 55,000 denominations of Christianity. Now, that's an unfair characterization because they say any denomination is a church that doesn't necessarily, so you could have a Catholic denomination, but they're not sending their money to the Catholic Church, so they count as a different denomination. There's actually 3,000 mutually excommunicative sects of Christianity. These are sects that say ours is the one path to salvation, and if you don't follow ours, so that's 3,000 excommunicative sects, and I have yet to find any way one of them can say that theirs is in fact the correct one. And if there was an easy answer to that, I don't think there would be 3,000. So it sounds like no true Scotsman. You're not a Christian unless you follow my version of Christianity, and that may be true, that may not. My overall point here is that there have been many Christians, and in fact, actually, if you take a look at the religion of Nobel Prize winners between 1990 and 2000, 65% of them have been Christian. Now, have they been Christian in the sense that you mean? I'm not entirely sure. And I think that's something that maybe everybody has to struggle with when it comes to their own religion. But I don't think, I think the vast majority of people seem to think that these are not incompatible, these beliefs. And the evidence for it is extraordinary. And we still haven't gotten to, I think we can get to, I don't know how we are on time, but I think we can get to, I mean, there's fossils, there's other evidence for how and why we know how human beings evolved. There's the DNA, there is all sorts of stuff But I think so. I seem to have lost the train where we were.
Yeah. Well, let me respond to one thing you said. 55,000 denominations and 3,000 who believe it's our way or no way. I'm certainly not one of those. I think salvation is only by grace through faith. But after all the arguments of all the centuries are all over and done, and you're going to die one day, Nick, and so am I.
Yeah.
Are you going to heaven? If you died today, are you going to heaven? Do you know for sure you're going to heaven?
No. I don't know for sure. So I'm not trying to say, no, I'm not going to go to heaven. I don't know for sure.
Okay. I am sure, not because I'm good, but because I'm forgiven. 50 years ago, I said, Lord, I'm a sinner. Would you please forgive me? And his blood was applied to my account. And I've got his righteousness on my account. Can't lose. I'm going to heaven for sure. And I think you can have the same thing. That's probably step one, is for you to get the Lord in your heart and get saved. And then he will enlighten you to say, well, the Bible is true. Would you agree that the Bible teaches that God made everything in 6 days? It's in the 10 Commandments. He said, honor the Sabbath, Exodus 20:11, because in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is. Do you believe the Lord made everything in 6 literal days?
Two answers. First of all, you said you're saved. Not according to Southern Baptists, who, unless you are doing the sinner's prayer quite regularly, you're not saved. So I still think there's a number of denominations that would disagree with you, and they will go to their graves believing every bit as strongly that they are correct and you are incorrect. As to what the Bible teaches, I think that the Bible does, the Bible says it's 6 days. Whether it's 6 literal days or not is sort of above my pay grade. But there are people who certainly believe that, and there are people who believe that the 6 days is metaphorical, or that the 6 days are 6 days in heaven, which is measured quite differently than 6 days on earth. And I think you get into biblical hermeneutics, and it becomes very difficult to understand precisely what is meant by that.
Well, we see from Genesis chapter 1 and 2, God made the plants on day 3 and the sun on day 4, and the animals to pollinate the plants on day 5. So I think it'd be really tough to say they're not literal days. Then plants are going to die waiting for the sun to come up and something to pollinate them. So I think the obvious teaching when God said, Moses, tell the people to work 6 days and rest 1, because I worked 6 days and rested 1. He's not telling them to work 6 million years and rest 1 million. He's telling them 6 days. Jesus said
if I can ask a quick question, the flood, Noah's ark, was subjected to, if it's going to cover the whole earth, was subjected to 6 inches of rain a minute. There is no structure that can withstand that kind of rain. So either one of two things in my mind happened. Either somehow God interceded so that this boat was able to stay afloat, which strikes me to make some sense. But if that's the case, then certainly God could keep the plants alive without the sun. And I'm not sure that he's necessarily bound to, again, missing information. Just because the Bible doesn't say that he wasn't keeping the plants alive, it's God. I think the people who, again, I'm not religious, so I'm speaking for people who are not my clan, but I think there are plenty of people who believe that God could intercede in such a way that the plants would be just fine for 1 million years.
Okay, I'd like to see how they metabolize. As far as 6 inches of rain per minute, I think you're laboring under a false illusion here that all the water for the flood came from rain. The Bible says it rained for 40 days, but the water kept coming up for 150 days. If you read Genesis 6 carefully, it says the fountains of the great deep broke open. Nearly all of the water for the flood came from inside the earth, not from above. The fountains of the deep broke open, and then the windows of heaven were opened. So the rain was 40 days, probably only added a couple of feet of water, whereas the fountains of the deep, if the Bible teaches very clearly in Psalm 24 and Psalm 33 and Psalm 136, 3 witnesses, that there was water in the crust of the earth. There still is today, enormous amounts of water in the crust of the earth. You can drill about anywhere and get a well if you go deep enough, but there are huge subterranean pockets of water. A Japanese scientist did a study on this and said probably 10 oceans worth of water in the crust of the earth right now, still. But if the water was in the crust of the earth, say 10 miles down, if that water broke through and came to the surface then would sink in to fill the void, which is probably why the Earth sped up just a little bit. We now have 365.2422 days instead of 360. But The water for the flood came from inside. Plus, the assumption 6 inches per minute is based on you have to cover Mount Everest. Well, Mount Everest was probably not there. The mountains arose, at Psalm 104 teaches, toward the end of the flood, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down. An earth covered with water, cracked up into plates, the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault, probably all of them formed where the water burst forth from the pockets, from the fountains of the deep. The plates of the earth would be shifting and tilting, and if one section of the earth dips down 2 miles and something else lifts up 2 miles on a 1,000-mile plate, 2 miles is nothing out of 1,000, you now have a mountain range and an ocean. All the water's going to run down into the ocean. Not on screen. Oh. So if you have the plate of the earth, 1,000 miles, let's say, the size of Texas, if it covered with a mile of water, if it tilts a little bit, the water's going to rush down. And you have, it's interesting, if you look at any globe or map of the world, all the mountain ranges follow the coastlines. Appalachian Mountains follow the Atlantic. The Rocky Mountains follow the Pacific. The Andes Mountains follow the South Pacific. The Alps follow the Mediterranean. It's as if they form the oceans and the mountain ranges at the same time because of the same thing. So you need to watch my video number 6. If you don't have that, Nick, let me know and I'll send an address and I'll send you my seminar series. You can watch it. And I think we get you straightened out your theology about the flood. It did not have to rain 6 inches a minute. The flood water came from inside, water coming up, not down. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think that's perfect. That's marvelous. I would absolutely love to learn about it. So this is well beyond my level of expertise. Now, when I want to talk about the Bible, so there's a Bible passage that I've always found interesting. Eliseus was traveling to Bethel, and he went up thence to Bethel and was going upon his way. Little boys came out of the city to mock him, saying, "Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head." Now that is 4 Kings 2:23 and 24. Now, if you talk to an atheist, well, so what happens to those boys? 2 Bears goes and kills 42 boys for mocking this old guy. Now, if you talk to an atheist, they're going to sit there and say, "Oh, look how terrible God is," so on and so forth. If you talk to somebody who knows the Bible, who's religious, and when I have religious questions, I don't go to my atheist friends when I have questions about the Bible, because I go to a minister, and I've got a couple ministers, Greek Orthodox, American Baptist, who are friends of mine who will answer questions when I have them. One of the answers to this is, and I asked about this, and I asked a minister, because every atheist I spoke to said, "Isn't it terrible that God tore apart 42 kids for this?" And what the truth is when you understand what "go up, thou bald head, go up," that is a threat. They are threatening to kill him. And if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but if I remember correctly, he was a prophet. So these children are threatening to murder a prophet. That is only something you could know if you talk to somebody who studied the Bible and who believes it. And once it's done in that set of criteria, all of a sudden you can understand the Bible much better. And again, you don't have to believe it, but now it doesn't look as terrible as it does. So when you talk about the flood and you say these are things I didn't know. So you've taught me something new, and I think it's valuable. But to bring this back to evolution, this is precisely why I think people need to talk about. We get into the whale hip bones, which we've discussed. Any biologist will tell you that in the females, again, it varies on species, but the bones are there, and especially for the smaller species, it's not connected to anything. And you had said repeatedly, why would it be there if it's not connected to anything? Precisely, that's the point. And if you look in the DNA actually tells you why it's there and where they came from. And again, it's a second tree of life that we already got essentially from the fossil record. Now, there's an interesting thing, because I know a number of creationists have said this, where the fossil record is circular in some way or another. But again, that is a serious misunderstanding because, okay, in some cases they do use fossils to date other fossils in the layers, and in some cases they date them by a different means. But the question is, how can you, if you're going to date fossils with other fossils, you're creating a circular system. This strikes me as very similar to the problem of Jesus and Daniel. If someone comes up and says, "Hey, look, how do I know that Jesus was the Messiah?" Well, there are many ways to do it, but let's say I decide to say Daniel. Daniel predicted Jesus, and he predicted when Jesus was going to be crucified, down to the year, more than 600 years away. He predicted this. Okay, well, how do we know that he's right that this was Jesus? Well, we know because Jesus died. Well, how do we know that Jesus was the Messiah? Well, because Daniel predicted it. And you end up with a completely circular system. Now, people use this to discredit the Bible all the time, but the problem is, if you look at Daniel, you'll see he made other predictions. This isn't the only one. And if you look at the New Testament, you'll find Jesus performed miracles that Daniel got him down to the year isn't the only evidence of him being the Messiah. But if you want to straw man the Bible, the best way to do it and to say, well, it's self-fulfilling is Daniel and Jesus. But you have to ignore all the other evidence. Are there fossils that are used to date other fossils in a way that might appear circular? Yes, but what you need to do is not talk to someone who doesn't believe it, not talk to someone who, and again, if we look at the whales, it seems to me that if you think evolution isn't true, you find that study that says in the males, in a certain species of the males, these bones have that purpose, and you sit there and say, poof, done, it's all answered. But all you got to do is scratch below it and realize, no, the study doesn't say what you think it does. And if you read that study, they say, look, in the males that have that hip bone, the hip bone has not atrophied as quickly as the others, as exactly evolution would predict. And while I agree that evolution is adding new information, it absolutely is, it also is accounting for what happens to the old information over time. And it has happened in those whales exactly as Darwin predicted.
All right, a couple of quick thoughts. Steve, put me back on here. Let's cover the story about the.
If I can interrupt real quick, because I do want to get this. But how much time do we have left, just so I can do either for pacing or just because? Do we have a set clock or?
No, it's been an hour and a half. Let's go about 10 more minutes, and you can have the final word. Well, you started, so you give your closing, and I'll give mine.
Sounds perfect.
Here's the story. 2 Kings chapter 2. Something's on screen there. Okay. 2 Kings chapter 2. And he went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, Go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. And he turned back and looked on them, and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tare 42 children of them. So it does not say it killed them. It says it tore them.
That's a good point.
Hit them, tore them up, didn't kill them. It might have killed them, but it doesn't say that. You got to be careful when you're going to, if some of the skeptics want to attack the Bible, they tend to exaggerate their enemy to make it look worse. The Bible does not say that. You mentioned
That's
Daniel.
why I got to talk to people like you about the Bible, because you know 10 times more. But this is, that's a really good point.
Okay. Just like it doesn't say all the flood water came from rain. It doesn't say that. So that's a straw man argument to say 6 inches an hour. That's what the atheists do. As far as Daniel predicting Christ, and you claim that was a circular argument, that is not correct. Daniel predicted in the future. That doesn't mean when Christ was born, we can now go back and write the book of Daniel 600 years earlier. Daniel was already written and sealed. So it's a linear argument. It's not circular. To find fossils, and there's no fossil record, first of all. There are lots of fossils. I've got thousands here in our museum. But it's not a record. None of the fossils you find, none of them have dates on them. None of them have a timestamp. They just simply are a fossil in the dirt, and none of them talk. So there is no fossil record, Nick. It's a bunch of fossils, and somebody's putting their interpretation on them, and I think they're mistaken. History, science has a long history of teaching things that are wrong, and they have a long history of not being willing to change once it's been proven they're wrong. They taught for 2,000 years that big rocks fall faster than little rocks. It's not true. But that's what they taught, because Aristotle said it. Oh, it must be true. And I think we're doing that today. Well, Darwin said it. Oh, it must be true. Yes. It's just simply not true. Nobody's ever observed any animal produce a different kind of animal. And yet the textbooks are showing the kids, look, protistas slowly turn to biology teachers. I resent paying for that. There's no possible way any fossil could show that happening. No animal today produces anything other than its kind. So why could the fossils do it? It's just not common sense. I think we've covered, well, I got a whole list of things from the first half hour, but there is no such thing as a tree of life. This is non-existent. Each one of these is a bunch of bushes. All the mollusks produce mollusks. That doesn't prove they have connections with worms and flatworms and jellyfish and protista and fish and humans. These lines are imagination. Each one is a separate tree. I think there's a tree of life of butterflies. And there are probably quite a variety of butterflies came from a common ancestor called a butterfly. There are 7,500 varieties of apple trees in the world recognized by biologists. They might have had a common ancestor called an apple tree. So certainly wild variations happen. From Great Dane to Chihuahua, wild variations happen. Most of the variations we have in modern husbandry wouldn't survive on their own in nature. They're, have to be protected and babysit by somebody, to keep it alive, like the Chihuahua. They would never last in the woods more than 20 minutes. The one around here is lucky. She's still alive. With the hawks flying by. But so this is imagination to say that because we see 1,000 varieties of butterflies, therefore we can deduce that butterflies and turtles and frogs and fish are related. This is imagination. This is not science. So the topic of the debate was, is the theory of evolution true? I say, no. Variations within the kind certainly happens. Microevolution, I hate to use that word because it does give the credence to the word evolution, but it's a variation within the same kind, and it does not add up to macroevolution. You can believe that if you'd like, but that's not science. And the vast majority of Christians accepting this, that is sad. That proves I have job security. So tell them all, I'll debate them all at the same time. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I agree with you that keeping it alive in a petri dish is very different than keeping it alive in the environment. That is precisely why 99% of all the species ever to have lived on the earth has gotten wiped out. And it is that process and that difficulty that actually causes evolution to work. It wouldn't work without that difficulty. I agree with you, Daniel is not circular. That was actually the point of my argument. Daniel is not circular. Daniel is strawmanned as circular by atheists. And when you understand that there's other evidence in Daniel, and when you understand that Daniel was written and accepted before Jesus was even born, it can't possibly be circular. But the argument can be made to look circular, which was the point I was trying to make. And I think that is exactly what happens when people take a look at the fossil record and say it's circular. They're doing actually the exact same thing. I agree it's not circular, and that was actually really the point of my argument. As to the fossil records, there is a fossil record. There is no one, it's not in any one place, and the fossils are in fact time-stamped. They're time-stamped by a number of different dating methods, and these dating methods can work in confluence and have been able to demonstrate time and time again anywhere in the world that they are reliable. And now the column of there's multiple columns of strata of fossils, and these columns, well, there is no one complete one, and we wouldn't expect a complete one. You get closer to complete ones in areas of geological stability, areas where there aren't earthquakes and stuff like that, where there haven't been serious floods. You can get a very nice column, but that column overlaps and is reproduced in different places all across the world. And what we get from all of them, because they overlap and because they are confluent, this ends up allowing, what was I going to say? This is how we know that the record is reliable. Now, I suspect what we're going to get is some information on possible difficulties with carbon dating, and that is another topic. We're running out of time, but maybe we do this again. I certainly enjoyed it, and we can get into carbon dating and the fossil record, but it is a record, and in fact, the record was started by now I forget the name of the person who first discovered most of these, discovered the actual fossil record, but it was discovered before Darwin. Darwin used it as part of how he built his theory, but it was discovered by mostly theists, people who were Christians and who already believed. The dating has, and there are some issues with, so the shells, I see that. Yeah, we can discuss the dating, but I should try to wrap it up.
Sure.
Let me see. I think I covered most of the stuff. Please.
Okay, we'll do this again sometime. So I'd like to ask you a simple question. The geologic column, James Hutton and some others invented all this back in 1830s. They say that the bottom layer is older than the top layer.
Yes.
And you can date the fossils by which layer they come from. So if it comes from a bottom layer, it's got a date that's older than from the top layer. If the top layer is indeed younger than the bottom layer, where did this layer come from? Did it come from outer space? Is material being added to the earth? Nick, all the dirt on the planet is the same age. All of it. Even if it came by evolution, by their theory, a rock cooled down from the Big Bang of molten, the earth was a molten rock and it cooled down and developed a hard rocky crust. It was liquid and became solid, and then gradually oceans formed, and it melted the sediments and turned them into mud and soil. Everything is the same age. Is this layer on top coming from outer space? How could they think it's millions of years younger? I don't think they've ever thought of that. And we can go through bad dates. We have plenty of those, but go ahead.
Well, again, like I said, when somebody finds a defeater to the Bible and they say, oh, I just found proof that the Bible is false if you read it. I found a contradiction. Listen, people have been studying the Bible for 2,000 years. If you think you found a contradiction just by reading it in 5 minutes, you're probably underestimating, or you're overestimating yourself. I would argue, in fact, that's the sin of pride. Let's take a look at the ocean. Is the best place actually to find fossils, because what happens is when things die, they settle down at the bottom of the ocean. Sediment ends up covering it, and that is how the fossils are preserved, and you end up getting layer after layer after layer. There is constant debris, dust, all sorts of matter all around us, and that matter is settling. It's also getting kicked back up again in various places. That's why you have a hard time having a stable, consistent column, is because it can get kicked up or moved around by any sorts of ways. But in the ocean in particular, what happens is you have sedimentary layers that are constantly getting added to that, and that buries the newer layers on top of the older layers.
All right, well, we should continue this another time, or you come down and visit Pensacola, Florida. I'll give you, not Pensacola, where am I at? Lenox, Alabama. I was in Pensacola for 30 years. Get stuck in the brain here. Fossils, are fossils forming today in any significant numbers, Nick? I think if you Google fossil graveyard, you'll find there are examples where there are trillions of fossils in one location. Many times all the bones are fully articulated. They're still connected to each other, full skeletons. Had to be buried quickly in water or mud or both. And how many animals died today, and how many are going to turn to fossils? My contention is, I think you'd have a hard time finding any fossils forming today, any, let alone trillions that have been found. I think the best explanation for this is a rapid flood, like the Bible teaches. But like it says in 2 Peter, the scoffers in the last days are ignorant of the creation and the flood. A global flood, which is certainly what Jesus believed in. He preached about Noah. He believed in Noah. He believed the story of Genesis. He quoted Genesis 25 times. So your position is certainly calling Jesus a liar, which you're welcome to do, but I think you need to realize what you're doing. So the flood is the best explanation for all the fossils. And I got a dozen pictures on my video number 4 of petrified trees, standing up petrified, connecting a whole bunch of these layers. Sometimes the trees are upside down, connecting all the layers. A flood is the only way to explain that I can think of, unless the tree grew upside down for millions of years looking for sunlight. So we'll get into that another time. Thank you so much for doing this. You want to give any contact info? You want to give your contact info if people want to get a hold of you?
Nicholas Lamar Soutter. I can be found just under Nick Soutter on Twitter. I can be found, I have a website, Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and also I'm the owner and operator of the Humanist Codex, and I own the Nicholas Lamar Soutter YouTube channel.
Good. And if you want to get hold of me, drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O, or come visit Lenox, Alabama, population 35. We're so far out in the country, they got to pump in the sunshine. Now, the moonshine flows freely in this county, but sunshine, they got to pump that in. So, Nick, thanks for doing this. Appreciate that. We'll do it again sometime, okay?
Thank you for hosting me. I sincerely appreciate it. I enjoyed it very much.
Right. Thank you. All right, folks, this is Kent Hovind at Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. We will not have Bible study tonight. We did last night a Q&A time for the people that were working here. I think everybody enjoyed that. People come and go all the time, and you guys enjoying your here a few more days, right?
Yes.
And your dad is actually going to paint the dinosaur
Yep.
on the old 1953 drag line. Okay. I'm reluctant to say we have a drag line here at DAL because somebody may misinterpret that and say, oh, wow, listen. Never mind. Okay. Anyway, thanks for joining us. If you want to help support our ministry, go to drdino.com and join our 777 Club. We're asking folks if they can give $1 a day, $31 a month. Take us on as a missionary to the blind and the dumb. We want to help these folks. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye.
And do not forget to check out our video on the global flood. And if you want to read some of our written work, check out below underneath this video, where all of our content is found with links for free.